Hi, I'm Alice, and I'm 28 years old. I work with kids. Recently, my boyfriend Tom proposed to me, and now I'm visiting his parents for the first time. Tom went to a really good university and has a cool job. He's smart, and everyone at work likes him. I've always thought highly of him. His dad seemed happy about us getting married and even said they never had a daughter and that Tom's mom would be happy too. But when I looked at his mom, she seemed upset. She had a frown on her face, like she was mad about something. Then, out of nowhere, she asked me if it's true that I didn't finish high school. She seemed to think that because Tom is so successful, I shouldn't be good enough for him. I felt really surprised and hurt by what she said. I told her it was rude to talk to me like that, and Tom also defended me, saying that my education doesn't matter. Both Tom and his dad stood up for me against his mom. But my mother-in-law didn't seem to calm down. She kept saying that it's natural for a mom to worry about who her son is marrying, especially about their education and job. She even talked about how children inherit their mom's genes, so she wanted to make sure her future grandkids would be great too. It felt like she was really stuck on the idea that I wasn't good enough because I didn't finish high school. It's true that some people care a lot about education and parents want the best for their kids, but it made me sad to think I was being judged just because I didn't graduate. There's actually a reason for that. My dad died in a car accident when I was young, so my mom had a tough time raising me and my twin sister Emma. To help out, I started working after middle school. Now, I'm going to night school to finish my high school diploma. I'm working hard and saving money, and I might even go to college someday. Tom supports me in this, and he's even offered to help pay for my college. Tom understands where I come from, and he's really caring. That's one of the reasons I love him and want to marry him. But it seems like my mother-in-law doesn't like this idea. Tom is an only child, so we might end up living with his parents in the future. I'm a little worried about how things will go if my mother-in-law already seems so against me. A while after, I moved in with my future in-laws, just a month away from our wedding. As the big day got closer, I had to make more trips to the wedding place to double-check everything. I also had to book hotels for our out-of-town guests. With work, school, and wedding stuff, I was super busy. But my mother-in-law didn't seem happy with how I was handling everything. Today, I was getting ready to go to the venue and putting on makeup when she suddenly said, "Oh my, what are you wearing?" She saw my outfit and blurted it out. "I'm getting ready to go to the venue." "So I thought I'd dress up," I explained. I wasn't sure if she didn't like me dressing up for the venue or if she just wanted to criticize me. "Huh. You say you're going to the venue, but you're just dressing like that to attract men, aren't you?" "You're so careless," she accused. She just assumed I was meeting another man instead of going to the venue. I didn't know what to say. I told her I was meeting Tom at the venue and suggested she ask him if she had doubts. But she didn't listen and just kept thinking I was up to something. Then, out of nowhere, my mother-in-law messed up my carefully styled hair. "Hey, what are you doing, mother-in-law? I spent so much time getting ready. This is terrible," I exclaimed. My hair was a mess and I couldn't go out like that. But instead of apologizing, my mother-in-law said, "There's no need to fix it. This hairstyle suits a high school dropout like you. You should wear your hair like this for the wedding." I was already late, so I quickly fixed my hair and rushed to the venue where Tom was waiting. When I got there, Tom saw my upset face and asked what happened. I was torn about whether to tell Tom what happened earlier, but I didn't want to bring up something so upsetting when we were supposed to be talking about the wedding plans. So, I decided not to tell him at that moment. Then, as the wedding day got closer, my mother-in-law came up with a surprising idea. She said, "Hey, Alice's mom lives far away, right? It must be hard for her to come and stay in a hotel. Why doesn't she stay with us?" Tom and I were both surprised by her suggestion. It would save money on hotels and it could help our families bond better. Tom suggested I talk to my mom about it, so I did right away. My mom was really happy with the idea, and we decided that my twin sister Emma would come too. At first, I thought my mother-in-law was being nice, but I had no idea what she would do next. The day before the wedding, my mom and sister came to stay at my in-laws' house. Seeing them after such a long time made me really happy. My sister Emma and I are super close, so we decided to share a room for the night. Emma fell asleep quickly after having a few drinks. She's out like a light, I thought, knowing she wouldn't wake up easily. Just as I was about to go to sleep too, I heard the door to our room open. I was puzzled and then heard a buzzing noise, like someone was shaving something. Now you won't be able to go to the ceremony tomorrow, will you? No need for hair for a girl who didn't finish middle school, I heard my mother-in-law say. I was shocked and turned on the lights. Mother-in-law, what are you doing? I exclaimed. The person in the bed suddenly sat up, surprising my mother-in-law too. Huh. Mother-in-law, you're Alice, right? She said, confused. She had mistaken me for Emma. That's not my hair. We're twins, and our faces really look alike, I explained. It turned out that it wasn't me whose hair got shaved, it was my sister Emma. What? How could this happen? It was supposed to be Alice, my mother-in-law exclaimed, clearly shocked. But Emma was still fast asleep, probably due to the drinks she had. When she wakes up and realizes her hair is gone, she'll be really mad. Emma's not one to hold back her feelings, so I knew she'd be furious. I can't cover for you on this, mother-in-law, I told her, feeling guilty. She probably left the room feeling uneasy. The next morning, Emma saw herself in the mirror and freaked out. She was furious about being bald. Our mom was there too and couldn't help but cry in shock. Tom was disturbed too, saying, "This is terrible. Who would do such a thing?" So, I decided to tell everyone what happened the day before. I was curious to see how my mother-in-law would react this morning, but she wasn't around. My father-in-law said she went for an early walk and hadn't come back yet. I started worrying that she might have run away, so I told her relatives everything and went to look for her. About 30 minutes later, a relative called me to say they found her at a nearby convenience store, so my father-in-law went there. My mother-in-law came back home with a bunch of excuses, unaware that she was being searched for. When she got home, she immediately said, "I didn't do anything wrong. It's all Alice's fault." Alice used the clippers on her own and shaved Emma's hair while she was sleeping next to her. I told everyone, shocked that she was trying to blame me. Don't be absurd. I didn't do anything. Weren't you the one who entered the room yesterday? It's ridiculous that you're still lying about it, I snapped, feeling frustrated by her denial. But my mother-in-law kept denying her involvement. Then my father-in-law seemed to recall something. He went outside and returned with something in his hand. "Alice, is this the clipper?" he asked, holding it out to me. When I looked at the clipper, I instantly recognized it as the one my mother-in-law used last night to shave off Emma's hair. "That's it. That's the clipper." "But where did you find it?" I asked, feeling confused. "It seems this clipper originally belonged to your father-in-law. He's always been particular about his appearance and carried grooming tools with him. When we checked his car, the compartment where he kept his grooming stuff was messed up. And the clipper was gone," my husband explained. "I always keep my car keys in the bedroom. If there's brown hair in this clipper, then it's clear that your mom is the one responsible," my father-in-law added, beginning to take apart the clipper. Inside the clipper was unmistakably brown hair, which we knew belonged to Emma. She probably couldn't clean it properly because she had to rush out in the dark, my father-in-law concluded, displaying the hair to everyone. My mother-in-law sank to her knees. "Alice, it's all because of you. You tricked Tom, despite being uneducated and poor. I wanted you to leave Tom no matter what," she confessed. I felt sickened by my mother-in-law's selfish words, but the one who reacted the strongest was Emma, who had her hair shaved off. "I don't care what's happening to you," Emma said strongly. "What can we do now?" "I can't go to the wedding looking like this," she said, sounding upset. Emma's father-in-law heard her worry and called a friend who knew how to fix hair. They decided to bring a wig quickly. It would help Emma's hair look better for now. But they needed to find a solution for her mother-in-law too. 30 minutes later, the friend of Emma's father-in-law came with the wig, and Emma looked beautiful with her new hair. At first, they thought about cutting the mother-in-law's hair like they did with Emma, but they didn't feel right about it. Instead, they decided to reveal the mother-in-law's bad actions to everyone. At the wedding, there were some landlords who had been helping the mother-in-law's family for a long time. They were close to Emma's father-in-law, and hearing about what happened would surely affect the mother-in-law's parents. The landlords had been giving them a discount on their rent, but they might stop helping them once they found out about the mother-in-law's behavior. They might even make things worse by increasing the rent or making them leave the apartment. The mother-in-law's parents were poor and depended on this help. If they were forced to leave their apartment, they would have to stay with the mother-in-law. But from what Tom had said before, it seemed like the mother-in-law didn't get along with her parents and wouldn't want to take care of them. Living with her parents would be very difficult for the mother-in-law. "Please wait, I'll be in big trouble if you do that. I'm really sorry, it was my fault. I got carried away and did something wrong. I'm sorry, Emma. I'll compensate you for the damage, so please forgive me." The mother-in-law kept apologizing over and over again, bowing down on the floor. But even with all the apologies, Emma's hair couldn't be fixed. After talking it over, they decided that Emma's father-in-law and Tom would tell everyone about what the mother-in-law did. Emma had already agreed to this. The mother-in-law said she didn't want to go to the wedding and tried to escape, but Emma and Tom stopped her. When they got to the wedding place, relatives who had heard of the situation through messages looked very worried as they approached us. We showed everyone what the mother-in-law did wrong, and Emma bravely took off her wig, revealing her bald head. Everyone was shocked, especially the women, who couldn't believe it. For a woman, her hair is very important, so imagine the shock of suddenly having it shaved off. Seeing Emma like this made some people cry. Then, as expected, the landlord came to the mother-in-law and asked if it was true. At first, she tried to lie, but Emma's father-in-law encouraged her to tell the truth, and she finally admitted it. The landlord was furious and also scolded the mother-in-law. After that, the mother-in-law looked sad during the rest of the ceremony, which was unusual for her. The wedding went well, and we were happy to have the blessings of many people. But we couldn't stay in the same house with the mother-in-law anymore, so we decided to move to our own apartment and start a new life as a couple. The mother-in-law panicked when she realized we were leaving the house. She cried and begged us not to go, but we couldn't stay with her anymore. Even the father-in-law felt the same way. He told her he wanted a divorce and asked her to leave the house. The mother-in-law looked scared and held onto the father-in-law, pleading with him to reconsider. She said she had nowhere else to go because she didn't get along with her own parents. She was trembling and looked like she might collapse at any moment. But I didn't feel sorry for her, considering what she did to Emma. I never expected someone to shave my head while I was sleeping, mistaking me for Emma. The mother-in-law kept trying to convince us to let her stay, but the father-in-law contacted her parents, and eventually she had to leave the house. Now, she's living with her parents, even though they have a difficult personality, and she's struggling to take care of them all by herself. The mother-in-law kept calling us, wanting to start over, but we didn't want to live with her again, so we blocked her calls. Now, we're living happily with the father-in-law in his old house. We decided to renovate it together. The father-in-law built his dream study, Tom set up a display area for his model figures, and I installed a modern kitchen. We also made a room for the child we plan to have in the future. Now, the three of us are living comfortably. Emma's hair, which was shaved off before, has grown back short and looks great. Her friends love her new look. She jokes about what happened, which sometimes makes me feel conflicted. Emma visits us for sleepovers sometimes, and I always look forward to that. Even though there might be challenges ahead, I believe we can overcome them together.
During a supposedly casual family dinner, the mood shifted when Marcella, my sister-in-law, casually announced, "So I lost my apartment. Guess I'll be crashing with you guys for a while." She flashed a smirk at my husband, Darius, as if they had already discussed this without me. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Excuse me?" Marcella shrugged nonchalantly. "Don't worry, I'm a great roomie. I'll just take the master bedroom since it's the biggest." My jaw dropped as Darius gave me an apologetic look. "Marcella, we didn't agree to that. You can't just invite yourself into our home." "Oh, come on, sis," she scoffed, her tone already grating. "Where else am I supposed to go? You wouldn't leave your favorite sister out on the streets, would you?" Before I could protest further, Marcella had already started hauling her belongings through the front door, dumping boxes and suitcases haphazardly in our living room. It was like a hostile takeover of my own home. Darius tried to play peacemaker. "Alara, maybe we can let her stay for a little while, just until she gets back on her feet." I shot him an incredulous glare. This was our house, our sanctuary. How could he agree to this unwanted invasion without consulting me first? Marcella caught my expression and laughed. "Relax. Teach. It's not like I'm a slob or anything. I'll clean up after myself." Her eyes danced with amusement as she added, "most of the time." That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that my peaceful life had just been upended. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a long, treacherous road ahead. True to her word, Marcella wasted no time making herself at home, a little too at home for my liking. Within days, her clothes and personal items were strewn about the house, as if she owned the place. Whenever I tried enforcing basic rules of courtesy, like cleaning up after herself, she'd blow me off with a dismissive, yeah, or an insincere, sure, Mom. Darius remained infuriatingly passive, which only emboldened Marcella's entitled behavior. She's just going through a rough patch, he'd say. Cut her some slack. One morning, I noticed several $20 bills missing from my wallet. When I confronted Marcella about it, she scoffed. You're accusing me of stealing? Real classy, Alara. Then where did the money go? I pressed, my voice trembling with anger. Maybe you just misplaced it, Darius chimed in, ever the mediator. No need to make accusations. I shot him an incredulous look. Was he really taking her side? Marcella simply shrugged and sauntered off, leaving me fuming. Over the following weeks, I noticed more and more money disappearing from our joint accounts and my personal stash. Darius remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. Whenever I brought up the missing funds, Marcella would expertly deflect and manipulate the conversation until I felt like the irrational one for even questioning her. You're always nagging me about something, she snapped one day as I confronted her about another missing 20. No wonder Darius is so stressed all the time. I opened my mouth to retort, but Darius cut me off. Enough, you two. I'm sick of being caught in the middle of your constant bickering. Marcella shot me a smug grin, batting her eyes innocently. Sorry, bro. I'll try to be more considerate of your wife's feelings. Her sickly sweet tone dripped with condescension, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. This was far from over. The real kicker came when Marcella decided to throw a party at our house, without asking permission, of course. I came home from work one evening to find a group of raucous strangers spilling out onto our front lawn, red Solo cups in hand. What is going on here? I demanded as soon as I spotted Marcella holding court amidst the chaos. She barely looked up from her conversation. Oh, hey sis, just having a few friends over, no big deal. No big deal? You can't just invite people into our home like this. Marcella rolled her eyes. Relax, we're just having some fun. You could use to let loose for once. Before I could protest further, a guy I didn't recognize came stumbling out the front door, sloshing beer from his cup. This party's lit, he slurred, giving me an inappropriate once-over. I recoiled in disgust. That's it. This needs to end right now. Everyone out. Ignoring my outburst, Marcella shot me a wicked grin. You know, if you kept acting so uptight, maybe Darius would have left you by now for someone more fun. White-hot fury coursed through me at her cruel insinuation. I opened my mouth to hurl back a blistering retort, but the sound of a loud crash from inside cut me off. My heart plummeted as I rushed through the door to find the cherished antique armchair, one of the few remaining pieces from my late mother's estate, overturned and shattered beyond repair. Tears stung my eyes as I fell to my knees, tenderly gathering the shattered remains. This had been one of Mom's most prized possessions, and these drunken idiots had destroyed it without a second thought. Marcella sauntered in, sizing up the wreckage with a casual shrug. Oh well, it was just an old chair anyway. No need to get so bent out of shape about it. I shot her a venomous glare, my grief quickly hardening into cold fury. Get out, I seethed through clenched teeth. Get your friends out of my house right now before I call the police. For once, Marcella seemed to recognize I wasn't making an empty threat. With a disdainful huff, she started ushering out her rowdy crew, muttering something about me being a stuck-up bitch under her breath. Darius rushed in once the commotion had died down, his eyes widening at the overturned furniture and shattered remnants of the armchair. Alara, what happened? Are you okay? I could only shake my head, my throat too choked with rage and sorrow to speak. This callous disregard for our home, our boundaries, our cherished belongings, it was unforgivable. Darius pulled me into an embrace, and that's when I realized with sinking dread he still didn't fully grasp the extent of his sister's cruelty. But I did, and I knew this was only the beginning. In the aftermath of Marcella's disastrous party, tensions in the house were higher than ever. I could barely look at her without feeling my blood boil. The smug, self-satisfied smirk she constantly wore only added fuel to the fire. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Marcella casually remarked, Since I'm living here now, I should probably get my name added to the house deed. I froze, the plate in my hand clattering back into the sink. Excuse me? She shrugged nonchalantly. Well, it only makes sense. I'm basically family, right? Might as well make it official. Like hell you are, I exploded, rounding on her. This is our home, Darius and I. You're just a freeloader taking advantage of us. Marcella feigned an expression of wide-eyed innocence. Darius, she's not seriously suggesting I'm a freeloader, is she? You know I'm good for it if you ever need help with the mortgage or anything. I whirled on my husband, desperate for him to take my side for once. But Darius merely averted his gaze, shifting his weight uncomfortably. You can't be serious, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Tell me you're not actually considering this. Before he could respond, Marcella piped up again with that simpering tone. Of course he's considering it. Why wouldn't he want to do something nice for his beloved little sister? This is our house, I shouted, feeling like I was going insane. Mine and Darius's. You have no claim to it whatsoever. Hey, no need to get so worked up, Marcella said with an infuriating chuckle. I'm just looking out for the best interests of this family. You're not my family. The words exploded from me before I could stop them. An ugly sneer twisted Marcella's features. Oh, I get it. I'm not the rich, precious family you always wanted, is that it? Just the embarrassing deadweight relative you can't wait to be rid of. That's not what I meant at all, I protested weakly, but she was already on a roll. Don't worry, I know where I'm not wanted. Maybe it's for the best if I strike out on my own after all. She shot me a look dripping with venom. Just don't come crawling back when you lose everything you've taken for granted here. With that ominous warning hanging in the air, Marcella stormed off, leaving an unbearable silence in her wake. Darius finally spoke up, his voice weary. Alara, maybe we should consider giving her what she wants, just this once, for the sake of keeping the peace. I stared at him, dumbfounded and utterly deflated. In that moment, I knew. He was never going to take my side over his sister's. The battle lines in this war had been drawn, and I was radioal territory. After that explosive argument about Marcella trying to get added to the house deed, I felt completely alone and betrayed, even by my own husband. Darius remained frustratingly passive, always making excuses for his sister's outrageous behavior. In my despair, I ended up confiding everything to my best friend and next-door neighbor, Jonah. He listened patiently as I vented, tears of anger and hurt streaming down my face. I just don't know what to do anymore, I said once I'd gotten it all off my chest. She's made it clear she wants to take over our home, and Darius won't lift a finger to stop her. Jonah shook his head grimly. Marcella's got him wrapped around her finger. Always has, from what you've told me. So I'm just supposed to let her walk all over me? Let her take everything I've worked for? A determined look came over Jonah's face. Not a chance in hell. We're going to fight back and expose her for the parasite she truly is. His conviction emboldened me. What did you have in mind? Over the next few days, Jonah and I discreetly set up hidden cameras throughout the house to document Marcella's misdeeds. He also helped me track down financial records and receipts, showing how she'd been steadily siphoning money from our accounts. This is the evidence we need to show Darius her true colors, Jonah said as we reviewed the damning footage. No more being able to gaslight you or play the victim. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction watching Marcella time and again violating our trust, stealing, breaking things, then nonchalantly lying about it later. This was who she really was under that sweet facade. Finally, I knew it was time to force a confrontation with both her and Darius present. I invited them over for a family meeting, not giving away my true intentions. When they arrived, I could immediately sense Marcella's wariness. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously at Jonah's presence. What's this all about? I took a steadying breath. You wanted proof that you don't belong in this house? Well, here it is. With trembling hands, I queued up the video compilation of her antics, stealing cash, inviting strangers over, the wanton destruction. Her eyes went wide with shock and outrage as it played. You've been spying on me? What the hell, Alara? No more lies, I stated firmly. It's time you both saw the truth about what kind of person you really are. Darius watched in pained silence, his expression unreadable. I could only hope this would finally be the wake-up call he needed to stop enabling her behavior. When it was over, Marcella laughed humorlessly. Very clever, but it won't work. Darius knows I'd never betray him like that. I braced myself, praying he would finally take a stand. The weight of this moment pressed heavily. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcella stared Darius down, her expression a sickening mix of feigned innocence and subtle challenge. "You know I'd never betray you like that, right, bro?" For a few agonizing moments, Darius didn't respond. He simply watched the damning video evidence with an unreadable expression. I held my breath, clinging to the desperate hope that this would finally make him see his sister for the manipulative leech she truly was. Then, slowly, Darius turned to face Marcella. "How could you do this?" His voice was little more than a hoarse whisper. "To my own wife." Relief washed over me. He was taking my side at last. But Marcella simply scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, come on. Like you're so innocent in all this. You've been standing by letting your shrill harpy of a wife walk all over me from day one. Don't you dare talk about her like that." Darius's shout made us all flinch. "Alara is twice the person you'll ever be." For the first time since I'd known her, Marcella looked momentarily shaken, but she quickly recovered with a contemptuous sneer. Yeah, go ahead and take her side as always, like either of you have a clue about real family loyalty." "This has nothing to do with loyalty," I exploded, unable to contain myself any longer. "You've been freeloading off us, stealing from us, disrespecting us in our own home." Marcella whirled on me, her eyes glittering with venom. "Disrespecting you? This coming from the woman who's been treating me like a burden from the second I stepped foot in this place? Because that's exactly what you are." The words burst forth, harsher than I intended, but too late to take back. "A selfish, entitled leech who thinks she can just take whatever she wants from us without giving anything in return." A tense silence fell over the room. Marcella opened her mouth, no doubt to spit out a scathing retort, but seemed to think better of it. Her gaze flicked briefly over to where Jonah stood silently observing, his phone gripped in his hand. A look of realization flickered across her face. With an overly dramatic huff, Marcella spun on her heel and stormed out, knocking over a vase on her way that shattered across the floor. Darius made no move to stop her, his shoulders sagging in apparent exhaustion. I'm so sorry, Alara," he murmured, not quite meeting my eyes. "You were right all along. I should have listened and put a stop to this sooner." I wanted to feel vindicated, but the wound of his betrayal still stung too sharply. Before I could form a response, Jonah cleared his throat, holding up his phone with a grim look. "Don't worry, I got her little tantrum on camera, too. Once this inevitably goes public, that'll be the final nail in her reputation's coffin." I could only nod numbly, because no matter how much satisfaction I might feel at having finally exposed Marcella's scheme, nothing could undo the painful truth. She had driven an irreparable wedge between Darius and me. True to Jonah's prediction, within a matter of days, the video exposing Marcella's misdeeds had gone viral online. I wasn't sure if he had leaked it himself, or if one of Marcella's so-called friends had spread it in an act of petty revenge, but the result was the same. Her deplorable behavior was on full display for the whole world to see. I'll admit, there was a perverse sense of satisfaction watching the clip of her unhinged meltdown rack up millions of views, along with a tsunami of scathing comments calling her out as the entitled parasite she was. "The mask finally slipped, huh?" Jonah remarked as we scrolled through the deluge of reactions. "People are seeing her for the real piece of work she is." My satisfaction was short-lived, however, as the backlash steadily intensified over the following days. Protesters began gathering outside our home, denouncing Marcella in the harshest of terms and demanding she face consequences. "This is getting out of hand," Darius said nervously as the raucous crowds showed no sign of letting up. I could only shrug, numb to it all. She brought this on herself. That's when Marcella finally resurfaced, storming back into the house in a whirlwind of fury. "You happy now?" she raged, tears of rage streaking her blotchy face. "You just had to try and humiliate me to the world, didn't you? Like you didn't bring that on yourself?" I shot back, unmoved. "You're the one hell-bent on burning every bridge with your selfish, unforgivable behavior." Unforgivable? She let out a bark of deranged laughter. You want to see unforgivable? Before I could react, Marcella grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ceramic vase, and flung it straight at me with startling force. I barely had time to flinch before the solid mass struck my temple, unleashing a searing wave of blinding pain and darkness. The next thing I remember was gradually regaining consciousness to see Darius restraining a still hysterical Marcella while Jonah hovered over me, calling an ambulance. Blood trickled warmly down my face from the ragged gash in my head. Why? I croaked out in a daze. Why would you do this? For a moment, a flicker of anguished regret passed over Marcella's face, but it was quickly snuffed out, her eyes hardening into cold callousness once more. Because I warned you there would be consequences for trying to take everything away from me, she spat out in a tone of chilling finality. And this is just the beginning if you don't back off. The ominous vow hung heavy in the air, even as the wail of approaching sirens signaled this sickening conflict was about to be thrust into an even harsher spotlight. As I slipped back into the blissful darkness, one fact became terribly clear. No home was safe with Marcella in it, not for me, or anyone else she deemed an obstacle to be eliminated by any means necessary. In the aftermath of Marcella's violent attack, everything changed. The trust and foundations of our marriage had been shattered beyond repair by her unforgivable actions. As I recovered from my injuries, Darius and I knew we could no longer go on living under the same roof as his unhinged sister, not after the terror and threats she unleashed. We filed a restraining order immediately, but the metaphorical scars cut far deeper. "I'm so sorry, Alara," Darius said for what felt like the 1,000th time. Regret and shame were etched into the worry lines on his face. I never imagined she could become so monstrous. I said nothing, unable to offer absolution just yet. My mind still replayed those harrowing moments on an endless loop. Marcella's twisted snarl as she hurled that vase, the sickening impact, her vile parting words. Some betrayals cut too deep to simply forgive. The financial and legal fallout was another nightmare altogether. Changing all the deeds, accounts, and updating our wills to permanently excise Marcella. It was a lengthy, draining process designed to fortify every possible vulnerability she could try to exploit. We didn't stop there either. Thanks to Jonah's quick thinking in capturing that fateful confrontation, Marcella's criminal assault was a matter of public record. We leveraged that into investing in state-of-the-art home security. Cameras, alarm systems, the full works. If she ever thought about coming near us again, we'd be ready. By the time we got the all clear to return home, it was as if a miasma had been lifted. No longer did we have to tiptoe around Marcella's dizzying sense of entitlement. The house was ours again, a sanctuary finally rid of her toxic presence. As a symbol of our reclamation, we held a massive yard sale and unceremoniously sold off every last belonging Marcella had brazenly dragged into our home during her occupation. Darius and I watched with grim satisfaction as her clothes, knickknacks, and cheap furnishings were picked over and hauled away by strangers. I'll never forget the palpable relief I felt as that final decrepit recliner, the last remaining trace of her squatting, was hoisted onto the truck of some lucky bargain hunter. "We made it through the worst of it," Darius murmured, slipping his hand into mine. His grip was warm, reassuring. "Our home is ours again." I gave his fingers a grateful squeeze, finally allowing myself to release the resentment and anger that had festered for so long. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, one thing was certain, that poisonous influence was exorcised from our lives for good. As the moving truck rumbled away with Marcella's sad collection of rejects, I inhaled the crisp spring air deeply. It carried the refreshing scent of new beginnings, of reclaimed happiness just waiting to blossom again. Our home was a sanctuary once more, and this time nothing and no one would ever be allowed to violate that sanctity again. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Damon standing on my doorstep after all these years. My prodigal son, who had stormed out of my life a decade ago, was back, and he wasn't alone. A young woman clung to his arm, her sharp eyes scanning my modest home with thinly veiled disdain. "Mom," Damon said, his voice devoid of warmth. "This is Elsie, my wife." Before I could respond, he barreled on. "I've hit a rough patch, lost my job, my house, everything. We need a place to stay, just for a little while. My heart sank. The last time I'd seen Damon, we'd had a bitter argument over his reckless choices. He blamed me for his troubles and stormed out, vowing never to return. Now, here he was, seeking refuge under my roof once more. Hesitantly, I stepped aside to let them in. Elsie wrinkled her nose at the modest furnishings, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her designer handbag. "It's not much, but it's home," I offered, my voice strained. Damon shrugged, already making himself comfortable on my worn sofa. "It'll have to do for now." As I showed them to the spare room, I couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival signaled the start of a new storm brewing on the horizon. Over the next few days, tension simmered beneath the surface. Damon criticized my frugal lifestyle at every turn, while Elsie made snide comments about my outdated belongings. "Don't you ever splurge on anything nice for yourself, Mom?" Damon had asked, eyeing my well-loved armchair with disdain. Before I could respond, Elsie chimed in, "Or maybe she's just too stingy to treat herself." Their words cut deep, reopening old wounds from our past conflicts. I found myself wondering if inviting them into my home had been a terrible mistake. One evening, as I passed by their room, I overheard hushed whispers that made my blood run cold. "Once we've got her worn down, she'll be putty in our hands," Elsie murmured. Damon's response was muffled, but I caught the gist. They were plotting to take over my house, to manipulate me into handing over the only thing I had left in this world. Tears stung my eyes as I retreated to my bedroom, the weight of their betrayal settling heavily on my shoulders. These weren't the actions of a son seeking refuge. This was a calculated ploy, and I was the target. As I lay awake that night, steeling my resolve, I vowed to fight back against their deceit. If Damon and Elsie thought they could waltz back into my life and strip me of everything, they had another thing coming. The battle lines were drawn, and I would do whatever it took to protect what was rightfully mine, even if it meant going to war with my own flesh and blood. In the days that followed, Damon and Elsie's true colors began to show. Their disdain for my modest lifestyle grew more apparent with each passing day, and the once hushed whispers gave way to blatant disrespect. "This house is a dump," Damon scoffed one morning as I prepared breakfast. "How can you stand living like this, Mom?" Elsie chimed in, her perfectly glossed lips curling into a sneer. "Yeah, it's like you're stuck in the past or something." I bit my tongue, refusing to take the bait, but their words stung nonetheless, reigniting old feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. As the weeks wore on, the tension in the house became palpable. Elsie would constantly undermine my authority, questioning my decisions, and making snide remarks about my parenting skills. "Is that really how you're going to handle this, Arlene?" she'd say, her tone dripping with condescension. No wonder Damon left all those years ago. Damon, meanwhile, seemed content to let Elsie do the heavy lifting when it came to needling me. He'd lounge around the house, criticizing my every move while contributing nothing but his endless sense of entitlement. "Mom, can't you do something about this mess?" He'd whine, gesturing to the perfectly tidy living room. I tried to reason with them, to remind them that this was my home, and they were guests, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. "You should be grateful we're even willing to stay in this dump," Damon spat during one heated argument. "If it were up to me, we'd be out of here in a heartbeat." Elsie nodded in agreement, her eyes narrowed and cold. "Yeah, Arlene, you should count your blessings." Their words cut deep, reopening old wounds and stirring up long-buried resentments. I found myself questioning my decisions, wondering if I'd made a mistake by letting them back into my life. But then I'd catch glimpses of their true nature, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of empathy, and my resolve would harden once more. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I overheard them whispering in the next room. "Once we've worn her down enough, she'll be putty in our hands," Elsie murmured. "Then we can really start taking what's ours." Damon's response was a quiet chuckle, sending a chill down my spine. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that their intentions were sinister. They weren't just ungrateful houseguests. They were actively plotting to take everything I had away from me. As I lay awake that night, anger and determination coursed through my veins. I wouldn't let them win. This was my home, my life, and I'd be damned if I let a couple of manipulative leeches bleed me dry. From that moment on, I vowed to fight back against their machinations with every fiber of my being. If they thought they could waltz in and take what was rightfully mine, they had another thing coming. The battle lines were drawn, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to protect myself, even if it meant going to war with my own flesh and blood. After overhearing Damon and Elsie's sinister plot to manipulate me into handing over my home, I knew I had to take action. I couldn't let them blindside me and strip me of everything I'd worked so hard for. The next day, as they lounged around the living room, I feigned a trip to the store. Instead, I hid in the hallway, straining to hear their hushed whispers. "Once we've got her eating out of our hands, we can start really taking what's ours," Elsie murmured, her voice laced with malice. Damon chuckled darkly. "Yeah, this place will be a gold mine once we've got the old lady out of the picture." My heart sank as their twisted scheme unfolded before me. They weren't just after my home. They wanted to bleed me dry and leave me with nothing. From that moment on, I became a silent observer in my own house, carefully documenting their every move and conversation. I planted hidden cameras and kept a meticulous journal, determined to gather enough evidence to expose their treachery. The days turned into weeks, and their despicable behavior only escalated. Elsie would intentionally antagonize me, pushing my buttons until I was on the verge of snapping. "Wow, Arlene, you really let this place go to hell, didn't you?" she sneered one day, eyeing a spotless countertop with disdain. Damon would chime in, his words cutting deep. "Yeah, Mom, it's like you've just given up or something." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that every jab, every insult, was just another piece of evidence in my growing arsenal. Then, one fateful afternoon, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was in the kitchen when I heard a commotion coming from my bedroom. Creeping down the hallway, I peered through the crack in the door to see Damon rifling through my nightstand, stuffing wads of cash into his pockets. "What are you doing?" I demanded, bursting into the room. Damon whirled around, his eyes wide with panic. For a moment, he froze, caught red-handed. Then his expression hardened. "It's not what it looks like, Mom." But it was too late. I'd seen everything. In that moment, the floodgates burst open. All the pent-up anger and resentment came pouring out, fueled by the knowledge that my own son had betrayed me in the most despicable way imaginable. "Don't you dare try to lie to me, Damon," I shouted, jabbing a finger in his direction. "I know all about your little scheme with Elsie. You really think I'm that naive?" Damon's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He knew he'd been caught. "Get out," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "Both of you, get out of my house and don't even think about coming back." As they scrambled to gather their belongings, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. They had underestimated me, thinking I was just a feeble old woman they could take advantage of. But I was done being a victim. From now on, the gloves were off, and if they dared to cross me again, they would face the full force of my wrath. After kicking Damon and Elsie out, I thought the worst was behind me. Boy, was I wrong. Those two vipers weren't done sinking their fangs into me just yet. A few days later, I went to withdraw some cash from my savings account, only to find the balance alarmingly low. At first, I chalked it up to a banking error or a momentary lapse in my memory. But as I dug deeper, a sickening realization started to dawn on me. Damon had cleaned me out. That weasel must have gotten his grubby hands on my account information and drained my life savings while he was still living under my roof. The pieces all started falling into place, his constant snooping around my room, the furtive whispers with Elsie late at night. White-hot anger coursed through my veins. I should have known better than to trust that snake, even for a second. He had played me for a fool, preying on my misguided maternal instincts to pull off the ultimate betrayal. I didn't waste any time. The moment the bank opened the next morning, I stormed in and demanded to speak with the manager. After laying out the evidence, they promised to investigate and get to the bottom of the theft. Emboldened, I decided to confront Damon directly. If he thought he could just waltz back into my life, bleed me dry, and disappear without consequences, he had another thing coming. I showed up unannounced at the seedy motel where he and Elsie were holed up, pounding on their door with my fists. "Open up, Damon!" I shouted, not caring who heard. "I know what you did, you lying snake!" The The door flew open, revealing Elsie in a ratty bathrobe, her makeup smeared and her eyes glassy. "What's your problem, old lady?" she slurred, clearly hungover or worse. I shouldered past her, zeroing in on Damon lounging on the bed, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "My problem?" I spat, getting right in his face. "My problem is that you stole from me, you ungrateful little worm." For a moment, Damon had the audacity to play dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom." But then, in a slip of the tongue that would prove to be his undoing, he let a crucial detail slip. "Look, I didn't take that much from your savings, okay? Just enough to get us back on our feet." My jaw dropped. I hadn't mentioned my savings account, only that money had gone missing. He had just confessed to the whole sordid crime without even realizing it. "You lying sack of shit!" I roared, poking him in the chest with my finger. "You really thought you could pull one over on your own mother?" In that moment, any semblance of remorse or familial loyalty vanished from Damon's eyes. He sneered at me, his true colors finally revealed in all their ugly glory. "You know what, Mom? Maybe I did take your money, so what? You owed me after the way you treated me growing up." I recoiled in disgust, barely recognizing the twisted shell of a human being in front of me. "Don't you dare try to play the victim card with me, Damon," I seethed. "You're nothing but a pathetic little grifter, just like your father." With that, I turned on my heel and stormed out, my mind already whirring with plans for revenge. If Damon thought he could get away with robbing me blind, he had hugely underestimated the fury of a mother scorned. The legal system would be my weapon of choice, and by the time I was done, he would be begging for mercy he wouldn't receive. After my confrontation with Damon, I knew I needed reinforcements in my battle against those two snakes. As much as it pained me, there was only one person I could turn to for help, my estranged daughter, Lydia. We hadn't spoken in years, not since our last blow-up over Damon's antics, if I'm being honest. Lydia had always been the practical one, the voice of reason, trying to steer her wayward brother onto the straight and narrow, but Damon wouldn't listen, and eventually the constant fighting drove a wedge between Lydia and the rest of the family. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures. I tracked down Lydia's number and steeled myself for what was sure to be an awkward conversation. "Hello." She sounded guarded, suspicious. Couldn't blame her, really. "Lydia, it's Mom." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might just hang up on me. "Mom, what's going on? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "No, honey. Everything is not okay. It's your brother, Damon." Just saying his name aloud unleashed a torrent of emotions I thought I had buried long ago. I proceeded to lay it all out for her. Damon's sudden reappearance, his scheming with that viper Elsie, the stolen money, every last betrayal. To her credit, Lydia didn't interrupt. She just listened patiently as I unloaded years' worth of pent-up anger and hurt. When I finally finished, there was another long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said at last, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea things had gotten that bad with Damon." Relief washed over me. She believed me. That was half the battle right there. "Will you help me, Lydia?" I pleaded. "I don't know what else to do. He's taken everything from me." Without missing a beat, she replied, "Of course, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Over the next few days, Lydia and I formed a battle plan. As it turned out, my timely decision to gather evidence against Damon and Elsie's schemes would prove invaluable. Lydia, now a hotshot lawyer downtown, assured me we had more than enough to take them to court. With the recordings and financial records, we can nail them for fraud, theft, you name it, she said grimly as we pored over the files. I nodded, a familiar fire igniting in my belly. For too long I had allowed Damon to walk all over me, to disrespect me, and siphon away my hard-earned savings. No more. "We're going to bleed those two vultures dry, I growled, slamming my fist on the table for emphasis. "Everything they've taken from me I want back tenfold." A hint of a smile played across Lydia's lips. "Don't worry, Mom. By the time I'm done with them in court, they'll be lucky if they can afford to split a cardboard box under a bridge." With that, we shook on it. A pact, sealed in the fires of righteous vengeance. Damon and Elsie had awoken a sleeping giant, and now they would face the full, furious wrath of a mother betrayed. I could hardly wait to see the looks on their smug faces when they realized the tables had finally turned. The day of reckoning finally arrived. Lydia had done her homework, building an airtight case against Damon and Elsie that left no room for doubt or trickery. As we made our way through the courthouse corridors, I could feel the weight of years' worth of anger and betrayal fueling my every step. When we entered the courtroom, my eyes immediately found Damon and Elsie seated at the defendant's table. Despite their rumpled, haggard appearance, they still managed to shoot me matching sneers of defiance. Elsie even had the audacity to mouth something foul in my direction. I simply stared back at them, unmoved. Their intimidation tactics held no sway over me anymore. Not after everything they'd put me through. The proceedings kicked off, with Lydia wasting no time in laying out the damning evidence against the two grifters. Bank statements, audio recordings, you name it, she had assembled a meticulous paper trail that left no doubts as to their guilt. With each new exhibit unveiled, I could see the smug expressions slowly draining from Damon and Elsie's faces, replaced by naked panic. They had clearly underestimated my daughter's skills as a litigator. When it was my turn to take the stand, I didn't hold back. Staring my son dead in the eye, I recounted in excruciating detail the hell he and his vile accomplice had put me through over these past few months. The lies, the manipulation, the blatant theft. I left nothing out, letting the truth pour forth like a dam bursting. With each new revelation of their despicable actions, Damon seemed to shrink further and further into his chair. Finally, when I was done, there was dead silence in the courtroom. Even the judge looked shaken by the depravity I had laid bare. Damon's lawyer, a greasy bottom feeder if ever there was one, rose to launch a feeble defense. But Lydia was ready, her rapier wit eviscerating every flimsy argument and objection he could muster. In the end, the proceedings were almost anticlimactic. The evidence was so overwhelming, the judge had no choice but to rule entirely in our favor. I'll never forget the looks on Damon and Elsie's faces as the verdict was read. Shock, outrage, fear, it was all there, plain as day. Two conniving snakes who had finally gotten their just deserts. As we left the courthouse, Lydia pulled me aside with a proud grin. "You did it, Mom. We showed those two what happens when you try to mess with this family." I nodded, finally allowing myself to feel the immense weight lifting from my shoulders. Yes, we did. Justice was served. Over the next few weeks, the legal ramifications for Damon and Elsie's misdeeds kept piling up. Fines, frozen assets, even potential jail time on the table. But oddly enough, as gratifying as watching them squirm was, it didn't bring me the sense of complete satisfaction I thought it would. No, that came later, when Lydia and I were cleaning out my home office and came across an old family photo. One of the few remaining snapshots of us all together, as a happy family, before everything went so wrong. Hard to believe that's the same Damon who just tried to take everything from you, huh? Lydia mused, her tone tinged with sadness. In that moment, I realized that as much as Damon's betrayal had cut me deeply, a part of me would always grieve for the sweet little boy he once was, the one who used to cling to my leg and call me Mommy. Turning away to dab at my eyes, I made a silent vow to find peace, to resist letting the anger and bitterness consume me any longer. Damon had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. As for me, I had a second chance, a chance to rebuild and move forward, free from the toxicity he had brought into my life. With Lydia by my side, I knew I had the strength to do just that. Just when I thought Damon and Elsie had been knocked down a peg, fate decided to deliver one final, brutal kick while they were down. About a week after the court verdict, Lydia came banging on my door, eyes wild and lips twisted in self-satisfied smirk. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," she said without preamble, sweeping past me into the living room. I barely had time to blink before she shoved a manila envelope into my hands. "Take a look." Perplexed, I flipped open the file and began rifling through the documents inside. At first, the legal jargon and financial records didn't make much sense, but then a few key phrases started leaping off the page at me. Engaged in fraudulent business practices, cooking the books, money laundering. My jaw dropped as the full weight of what I was reading sank in. Damon, it seemed, had been up to far more shady dealings than just trying to swindle his own mother. This is unbelievable," I stammered, gripping the damning papers with white knuckles. "Where did you get these?" Lydia grinned, radiating the cocky self-assurance that made her such a shark in the courtroom. "Well, after we hit Damon with that fraud lawsuit, I kept digging," she explained with relish. "Turns out he's been running all kinds of scams and shady business deals for years." My head was spinning, but Lydia plowed ahead, laying out the full scope of Damon's tangled web of deceit and illegality. Offshore bank accounts, falsified tax returns, you name it, my son had been up to his eyeballs in more criminality than I could have ever imagined. "The best part?" Lydia's grin widened, her eyes glinting with triumph. "These records are ironclad. No way Damon can wriggle out of it this time." I sank onto the couch, the fight draining from me as the weight of my son's depravity threatened to crush me. How could he have fallen so far? What kind of twisted path had led him to such moral bankruptcy? As if reading my mind, Lydia's expression softened. "I know this is a lot, Mom. Believe me, it wasn't easy for me to accept that my own brother is, well, a complete scumbag." She reached out, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "But look on the bright side. With this new evidence, we can bury Damon and that viper Elsie for good, make sure they can never slither back into our lives again." I forced myself to nod, to push aside the tangled mess of emotions swirling inside me. Lydia was right. No matter how deep Damon's betrayal cut, dwelling on the past would only give him more power over me, over us. Instead, I focused on the future, a future free from Damon's toxic influence, his never-ending cycle of lies and manipulation. A future of peace, of being able to rebuild what he had so callously tried to strip away. "You're right," I said at last, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "It's time we showed those two exactly what karma has in store." This time, there would be no courtroom theatrics or legal loopholes to exploit. Damon's own hubris and greed had sealed his fate, and I would be lying if I said I didn't look forward to watching him reap what he'd sown. As Lydia grinned back at me, I felt a surge of gratitude for having her in my corner, fighting this battle alongside me. With her relentless tenacity and my newfound resolve, we would emerge victorious. Damon thought he could break me, could grind me down until I had nothing left to give. But he was wrong. This fight was far from over, and next time, I would be the one dictating the terms of his surrender. The day Damon and Elsie finally slithered out of our lives for good was one I'll never forget. After the bombshell revelations about Damon's far-reaching criminal activities, the authorities wasted no time in cracking down. Within days, their assets were frozen, their homes and businesses raided by federal agents. As I watched the mugshots of my disgraced son being paraded across the evening news, a complicated tangle of emotions swirled within me. A part of me felt vindicated, relieved that this poisonous chapter was finally closing. But there was also an undeniable sadness, a grief for the sweet little boy Damon had once been, before greed and moral decay set in. Lydia, ever the pragmatist, had no such mixed feelings. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," she declared as we witnessed the dramatic arrest footage. "He brought this on himself." I could only nod mutely, too emotionally drained in that moment to articulate the depth of my feelings. In the days and weeks that followed, the legal fallout from Damon's misdeeds continued to mount. Prosecutors were determined to make an example of him, throwing every charge they could at the proverbial wall to see what would stick. Through it all, Lydia was my rock, shepherding me through the dizzying legal quagmire with her typical bulldog tenacity. Seeing her in her element, carving through the legalese and courtroom theatrics like a hot knife through butter, filled me with an immense sense of pride. This was the Lydia I remembered from her childhood, whip-smart, fiercely principled, and possessed of an unshakable moral compass. Watching her now, I felt a pang of regret for all the years of estrangement that had separated us, a chasm of resentment largely driven by my inability to control her wayward brother. As the dust gradually settled and Damon's imprint on our lives faded, I found myself re-evaluating my priorities. So much of my existence had revolved around that black hole of a human being, jumping through hoops in a futile attempt to rein in his toxic, self-destructive impulses. No more. From now on, I vowed to fill that void with the people and pursuits that actually mattered, reconnecting with dear friends, picking up hobbies that had fallen by the wayside, simply appreciating the blessings in my life that had too often been overshadowed. Most importantly, I committed myself to repairing the bond with my daughter, to making up for all those lost years. In the aftermath of Damon's betrayal, Lydia had been my guardian angel, fighting tooth and nail to protect what was rightfully mine. I would be forever grateful. We started small at first, weekly lunch dates, the occasional movie night. But gradually something shifted between us, the froideur melting away to reveal the closeness of our old mother-daughter bond. Just having her in my life again, her warmth and vitality and laughter, was like a salve on the deep, aching wound Damon had left behind. Finally, I was able to breathe again, to feel light and hopeful in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, over glasses of wine, Lydia reached across the table to grasp my hand. Her eyes were uncharacteristically misty as she spoke. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all that hell with Damon, Mom. You didn't deserve any of it." I gave her fingers a squeeze, a lump forming in my own throat. "It's okay, honey. We got through it, together." And in that moment, staring into my daughter's eyes, I knew those words rang truer than she could ever realize. Against all odds, Damon's venomous campaign to tear our family apart had achieved the exact opposite. His actions had opened my eyes to what really mattered and brought Lydia and I closer than ever before. For that alone, as painful as the journey had been, I would be forever grateful. The cheery graduation music clashed with the pit in my stomach as I watched Derek chuck down yet another glass of cheap champagne. He grinned ear to ear, slurring drunken congratulations to our grandson Mason. Something was off about his jovial demeanor. As the reception wound down, I offered to take Mason home, silently dreading the drive back to Derek's house. The place still reeked of my daughter-in-law Jenna's perfume, the sickly sweet smell of fakery. Mason passed out in the back seat before we even left the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I caught Derek sauntering up behind a group of his sleazy poker buddies, their laughter carrying across the windswept lot. "Can you believe that ditz finally did me a favor and took off?" Derek's words knocked the air from my lungs. "Just think of all the insurance money I'll rake in." The guys roared with laughter, pounding Derek's back like he'd just been crowned king. My hands gripped the wheel as flashes of memories assaulted me. Jenna's trembling smile barely concealing her silent tears, the scribbled note tucked in her journal hidden in the attic. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far." In that moment, my suspicions solidified into a grotesque reality. The monster I'd watched my daughter fall for, blinded by young lust and his empty promises, had somehow won. Jenna was gone, or worse, all for Derek's greed. The engine revved as I tore out of the lot, Mason jolting awake next to me. "Wow, Grandma, what's the rush?" I steadied my shaking voice, speaking the half-truth I'd been rehearsing for weeks. "Nothing, honey. I just really need to get home." That night, after tucking Mason into the guest room, I pulled out the secret box I'd been stashing in the attic ventilator. Jenna's meager collection of belongings, all that remained of my daughter-in-law's shattered life. Her tattered journal landed in my lap with a thud, my fingers tracing the indentation where her last words were scratched in frantic desperation. "If you're reading this, Derek has finally gone too far. Keep this safe, and keep an eye on Mason." The implications choked me. How long had she suspected Derek's malice? What hell had she been enduring while we all blissfully looked the other way? Hot tears streamed down my cheeks. No more. I swiped them away, my jaw clenching in resolve. Derek's monstrous arrogance had handed me all the evidence I needed. It was time to strike. Over the next few weeks, I watched Derek with hawkish scrutiny. His exuberant spending and boisterous laughter raised eyebrows all over town. New Italian suits, a sports car in cherry red, reservations at the ritziest steakhouses. Living it up since the deadweight ditched him, his vile friends would snicker over bourbon and cigars. I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. How dare he satirize Jenna's disappearance so brazenly? My sweet, gentle daughter-in-law who showered loves on Mason and showered me with hugs even after Derek's affair. Her words from our last lunch echoed in my mind. "I think he's up to something, Mom. I've found things, but I'm afraid if I pry, he'll lash out." I shuddered, realizing her disappearance may have saved her life. But from what, exactly? I needed answers. My first stop was the bank, requesting statements for all of Derek's accounts, a ploy I spun as concerning for his sudden affluent spending. The documents told a story of deception, maxed credit, compounding gambling debts owed to some terrifying names, and a 7-figure life insurance payout scheduled just weeks after Jenna's disappearance. My blood boiled. That smirking, materialistic snake wasn't grieving. He was cashing in on his wife's vanishing act. I longed to confront him but fought off my rage, knowing I'd need an incredible smokescreen to take him down. Next, I turned my sights on Jenna's inner circle, starting with Tara, her closest work friend. He had money troubles, big ones, Tara confided over a hushed brunch, and Jenna suspected he was unfaithful again, though she never confided details with me. She wrung her hands, voice cracking. I'm just so worried I know, I stated firmly, which is why we're going to find her. Tara's eyes burned with promise. Whatever you need. With an ally and a trail of evidence, Phase 1 was complete. As satisfying as lashing out at Derek felt, I knew I'd have to be patient and judicious. The path ahead would require deft precision. One false move and Mason's safety would be jeopardized. My grandson's life hung in the balance, and I'd be damned if I allowed that snake Derek to slither his way out of this. It was time to enlist some professional assistance from a friend who'd spent his life hunting reprobates like Derek. Phase 2 required calling in the big guns, starting with hitting up my old pal Raymond. Raymond's brow furrowed as he pored over the paper trail I'd compiled on Derek. Bank statements, phone records, even a sordid photo from the strip club where he'd been caught cheating months ago. This is one twisted character you're dealing with, he muttered, shoving the stack aside with a disgusted huff. But it's a good start. I bristled at his nonchalance. A start? Ray, that praved con man plotted to kill my Jenna. Raymond's eyes softened as he reached for my hand. I know, Elle, and we'll nail that bastard's hide to the wall, but we've got to be meticulous, build an airtight case piece by damning piece. Grinding my teeth, I gave a reluctant nod. As a retired police captain, Raymond knew how to play this sadistic game. As much as I craved to barge in, fist-swinging, cooler heads had to prevail, especially for Mason's sake. That poor kid had been fed lie after lie by his father, thinking his beloved mother simply took off. The thought of him trapped in Derek's clutches made my skin crawl. Over the next several days, Raymond and I built a coordinate strike, burning the midnight oil over whiskey and case files. He leveraged his old officer contacts to unearth the sordid details, Derek's bookies, his side chicks, and most damning of all, the inflated life insurance premium he'd started paying weeks before Jenna's vanishing. There's our motive, Raymond said, tapping the document. He quite literally took out a policy on her life before attempting to, well... A lump formed in my throat as I considered the depths of Derek's depravity. What's more, as a teacher with modest earnings, Jenna had been blindsided by the massive payout. No wonder Derek was living so large. With every clue, the picture became clearer. He'd been setting the stage to cash in, all while keeping my beloved girl-in-law clueless to his sinister plot. The dizzying realization made me queasy. Just as I steadied my breath, Raymond slid another photo across the table. Derek stumbling from a sleazy motel room, lips smeared in tawdry lipstick, his sly grin stretching ear to ear. This was taken 3 days after Jenna went missing, Raymond said grimly. Care to guess who our friend in the cowboy hat is? I squinted at the petite blonde emerging behind Derek, her face partially obscured but still achingly familiar. Tara, Jenna's friend. The same young woman who had just promised to help us bring her down. The deception left me seething as my fists clenched. I should have known that snake couldn't be trusted. But then it hit me. What if this was merely another strategic deception, one that could play perfectly into our trap? A slow smile spread across my lips. Oh, she's going to help us all right, I purred, snatching up the incriminating photo. More than she'll ever know. Raymond cocked an eyebrow but said nothing, wise enough to let me take the reins. He simply refilled his glass as I outlined my master plan, one that would leverage every last player on the chessboard to protect Mason and bury Derek once and for all. Revenge, like justice, would be best served piping hot. The family dinner was a dry run for my grand inquisition of Derek. Raymond and I had meticulously assembled every document, every photo, an overwhelming case to dismantle his lies once and for all. Yet a bigger challenge loomed: Mason. His allegiance was still divided between his beloved late mother and his manipulative, very much alive father. I had to tread carefully, protecting him from the full, sordid truth, until Derek's defenses were shattered. Mason eyed me cautiously from across the table as I laid out the bread and salad. Derek, ever the arrogant fool, filled his wineglass to the brim, oblivious to the reckoning on the horizon. "You've seemed awfully preoccupied lately, Elaine," he said with a smirk. "Everything okay over there in Vinegar Villa?" I bristled but maintained my poise. "Everything is fine, Derek. I've just been catching up on some reading." His brow arched in mock concern. "Oh, do tell. Maybe I can recommend a nice work of fiction to lift your spirits." The venom in his voice was palpable. This smug bastard had no shame, did he? No matter, I'd wipe that Cheshire grin off his face soon enough. Suppressing a twisted smile, I retrieved the thick manila folder tucked under my seat. "Actually, I've been studying up on much more riveting literature. The kind with pictures." With a flat thump, I slapped the folder on the table, its contents spilling free: crime scene photos, bank statements, Inizined motel stills. Raymond remained stoic, but Derek's complexion drained of color. "The hell is this?" he sputtered. "The truth," I said evenly. I turned to Mason. "Something your father seems allergic to." Mason's eyes darted between Derek and me. Horrified confusion splashed across his face. "Dad, what—" "Don't listen to her, son," Derek spat, sweat beading his brow. "Your grandma's had too much goddamn Pinot and—" "I've had enough," I roared, slamming my fists on the table. "Enough of your lies, your philandering, your vile disrespect for Jenna and this whole family." Wine sloshed from overturned glasses as Derek shot to his feet. "How dare you, you conniving old bat! You've gone and lost your damn mind." Raymond rose like a monolith beside me, his baritone voice cutting through the commotion. "Can it, dirtbag? The Hashers are all here, therapists, clergy, everyone who gave a damn about Jenna. We've got enough to put you away for—" I tuned out the legal jargon, focusing on Mason. Shock and horror contorted his boyish features as the weight of the truth crashed over him in waves. My heart ached to shield him from this pain, this ultimate betrayal. Tears streamed down his face as he turned to Derek. "Dad, what did you do?" Derek's face reddened. For an instant, I pitied the boy still clinging to his father's imaged nobility. Then reality struck in the form of Derek's chilling backhand. "You'll do as I say, you disrespectful little—" I moved on instinct, my elbow catching his ribs with a sickening crack before Raymond hauled him back. The beast's true colors raged to the fore, mercilessly unleashed on his only child. As Mason crumpled to the floor, I rushed to his side, pulling him close. He sobbed into my chest, so fragile, yet still clinging to hope. Hope that for once, truth would finally prevail over lies, and I would ensure it did, no matter how much carnage the gathering storm would leave in its wake. The aftermath of Derek's public meltdown was a blur. Mason refused to speak to or even look at his father, staying glued to my side like a terrified child. I didn't blame him. That ruthless slap had finally shattered the illusion of Derek's hollow paternal facade. As for Derek himself, he ricocheted between blustering threats and sniveling pleas as Raymond's cop buddies hauled him away on suspicion of domestic violence. Of course, it was merely the tip of the iceberg, but an important first step to strip away his freedom and his cockiness. "I want that smug prick to feel the walls closing in from every angle," Raymond assured me later that evening over straight whiskeys. We'd reassembled at his place to regroup, poring over the meticulously assembled case files and devising our multi-pronged attack strategy. With Derek safely tucked away, we could accelerate our efforts without him slithering free. "First order of business is protecting Mason," I said, jaw clenched. "He's not going anywhere near that snake again until the venom's been completely extracted." Raymond nodded grimly. "Agreed. We'll get emergency custody pushed through so he's fully in your care. Judges will side with us, especially after that sick display." "Good." I drained my glass, relishing the slow burn at the back of my throat. "Because the bastard crossed the final line when he struck that boy. Everything from here on out is scorched earth." For the next several hours, we assembled our chess pieces. Anonymous tips firing off to the police about Derek's illicit gambling, shady business dealings, and possible crimes against Jenna. A meticulous forensic audit to freeze every last penny of his assets, smokescreen transactions designed to panic him into revealing his hand. Finally, we formed the centerpiece, a meticulously planned sting operation to catch Derek red-handed in the midst of his next infidelity. This one to be captured on video and splashed across every social media feed in town. I grinned wolfishly as Raymond outlined the tech specs: special lenses and ultra-encrypted streaming links primed to broadcast Derek's lies and lechery to a hand-picked audience of influential friends, employers, anyone who could maximize his public flaming. He'll be so disgraced, so hamstrung by looming charges, that rolling over and confessing everything will be his only chance to try saving face. Raymond purred, clearly relishing the intricacies of our ornate takedown. I simply nodded, adrenaline thrumming through my veins as visions of Derek's unraveling danced before me. He deserved far worse than a fractured reputation or quelched finances. Budding Mason, my poor, innocent grandson, that unforgivable sin warranted the harshest karmic vengeance this life could serve, and I would be its sword of deliverance. Draining the last amber dregs from my glass, I turned to Raymond with a feral gleam. Let's make that bastard bleed. The sting was going off without a hitch. Tara had lured Derek to the seedy downtown motel with practiced precision, her coquettish texts and promises of fun speaking directly to his baser impulses. From my discreet staging point down the hall, I could hear the telltale sounds of Derek's arrival, his arrogant bravado greeting Tara, that familiar slithery tone that made my skin crawl. Well, hello there, gorgeous. You're looking even tastier than those pictures you sent. Tara's flirtatious girlish giggle was practically theatrical. You always were the charmer, Mr. Sullivan. Now why don't you come on inside and let me take care of you? I had to commend her committed performance, especially knowing that less than 48 hours earlier, I'd strong-armed her into cooperating by showing the proof of her previous trysts with Derek. The fear in those big doe eyes told me all I needed to know. As Derek's oily chuckle faded behind the closed door, Raymond emerged from the shadows, holding up a tiny microchip between his fingers. Cameras are hot and transmitting to our secure channel. Time to go live. We slipped on our headsets and tapped into the feed just as Derek was peeling off Tara's satiny robe, his meaty paws groping her lithe frame with shameless entitlement. God, I've missed this body. The lewd image was merely prelude for the fireworks to come. I thought of Mason, still recovering from his own traumatic disillusionment, and my righteous resolve strengthened. Expose this charlatan for the abusive, self-serving creep he was. That was the only path to justice. On Raymond's mark, our crew activated a precise digital operation, one that broadcasted the live stream to very specific trusted contacts: church leaders, Derek's employers, charity figureheads, upstanding people mortified to see one of their own engaged in such debased improprieties. Pandemonium erupted as our network expanded exponentially across the small town, the shock and horror reverberating through the entire community. The calls and messages deluged my phone in a barrage of disgust and repudiation, and through it all, Derek remained oblivious to his unraveling, rutting away on that tawdry motel room bed, at least until Raymond's gruff voice broke through the speakers. Having fun there, dirtbag. Derek froze, his bulging face snapping up in wild-eyed panic. What is this? A reckoning, Raymond replied coolly. One that's coming at you from all sides, thanks to that cute little video feed you're starring in. At that moment, Derek's phone began ringing off the hook, every busybody and professional contact bearing witness to his brazen indiscretions. His frantic howls and fumbled attempts to kill the stream were utterly fruitless. The depraved spectacle was live for the world to see. Somewhere in that pathetic display of panic and shame, I was dimly aware of Tara gathering her clothes and darting from the room. Her part in our charade was over. Mine, however, was just beginning. Time for the snake's final constriction. Straightening my spine, I strode down the hallway with purpose. The door opened before I could even knock. There stood Derek, his sweaty, horrified face almost subhuman at this point. I locked eyes with the wretched creature, letting the waves of reviled anger wash over me. "Hello, Derek," I said coldly. "We need to talk." Derek's world was crumbling. I could see it in his wild, desperate eyes as he stared back at me in the dingy motel room, utterly shell-shocked. This has to be some kind of mistake, he stammered, struggling to cover his nakedness. You can't seriously think I'd... Save it, I snapped, his pathetic excuses like sandpaper against my resolve. The jig is up, Derek. We have everything. The affairs, the gambling, the insurance scam you tried to run on Jenna. It's all been exposed. He recoiled as if struck, his bravado finally deflating under the weight of his sins laid bare. Raymond emerged from the hallway, arms crossed like a sentry guarding an inmate. 2 uniformed officers flanked him, eyes scanning Derek with undisguised repulsion. We've got enough to put you away for a long time, Sullivan, Raymond growled. But even prison will be a cakewalk compared to the beatdown your reputation's about to take. As if on cue, Derek's phone erupted again, a cacophony of shrill rings and pinging text notifications. The shock, the scorn of his community discovering his web of depravity in such dramatic fashion. I watched as he picked it up with a shaking hand, scrolling through the onslaught of vitriol numbly. This can't be real, he whispered, complexion blanching. I'm ruined. Not yet you aren't, I said with chilling finality. But you can start making amends right now by telling us the truth about Jenna. Derek's roomy gaze flicked up to bore into mine, twin vortices of panic and hatred swirling in their depths. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the darkness that must have consumed my sweet Jenna's final days, the insidious dread she felt around this man she'd once loved. My stomach turned, but I held my steely glare. What did you do? For a span of harrowing seconds, Derek was utterly mute, the whirlwind of his sins rendering him catatonic. Just when I began to lose hope, his thin lips parted once more. I just wanted out, he croaked, voice barely audible. The debts, the money problems. I thought if I could just make her disappear, that big insurance payout would solve it all. The words hung heavy in the fetid air, a damning admission of his greed and monstrosity. Raymond tensed beside me, but I raised a hand to stay him. I needed to hear the unvarnished truth. But Jenna, she must have suspected something, Derek continued, his voice dropping to a guttural rasp. I started clearing out the accounts, keeping her in the dark, anything to keep the payout intact after I took care of her. But she caught wind and bailed. Took off with nothing but a damn ringful of cash from her jewelry box. My heart clenched as hatred bubbled through me like acidic bile. This whole sordid nightmare, every agonizing uncertainty Jenna must have endured in those final weeks, all because her husband craved an easier life. I wanted to unleash a scream, a torrent of sadistic punches, anything to absolve this rage. But I stayed my hand, letting the icy silence eviscerate Derek's soul. Because in this moment, I realized my revenge was complete. He was already in hell, forged of the very lies and betrayal he'd callously inflicted on everyone around him. The stain of his sins would never wash off. So as the police closed in, wrenching his arms behind his back, I simply watched in hollow triumph. No satisfaction, no feeling of release. The monster's secret was out, his freedom forfeit. But at what cost had this justice come? The question haunted me, as Derek was hauled away in disgrace. At last, the search for Jenna could begin in earnest. I only prayed that this nightmare's ending would allow for a shred of healing to take root. The call came just after midnight, Raymond's gruff voice crackling through the line with a mixture of elation and sheer disbelief. We found her, Elaine. Jenna's alive. My legs buckled as the words washed over me, equal parts rapture and terror paralyzing my every nerve. After weeks of feverish searching, haunted by visions of her scared face from that hidden attic journal, she was out there somewhere, safe. Raymond relayed the details. An anonymous tip from a diner waitress in Santa Fe who recognized Jenna's photo from the news broadcasts. Apparently she'd been serving there under an assumed name, laying low as a refugee from her own life. Relief and rage churned through me in sickening waves. While Derek rotted in jail awaiting trial, my poor girl had spent months as a fractured ghost, severed from her loved ones by the man who vowed to honor and protect her. But she was safe. That mantra alone propelled my shaking feet into action, every maternal instinct roaring to reunite with my unsung warrior. The airport's fluorescent lights stung my weary eyes, but I blinked past their glare, scanning every haggard face passing through customs. At last a familiar figure emerged, chocolate ringlets framing her hollow cheeks, her slender frame seeming to hunch under an immense invisible weight. "Mom?" she whispered, tentative and childlike. That was all it took to release the torrent. With a strangled cry, I gathered Jenna into my arms, clinging to her fragile bird bones as the dam burst. We sank to our knees in a tangle of sobs, fear and regret, and blessed relief whirling around us in a maelstrom. "You're safe," I gasped between heaving breaths. "Oh God, you're safe." For long moments, we were lost in our raw reunion, willfully blind to the churning current of life swirling around us. When at last Jenna leaned back, her eyes were glassy yet shining with a rekindled spark. "How?" she stammered, the word more rugged gasp than true question. I stroked her matted curls, grimacing at how frail and hounded she looked. No mother should ever have to see their child in such pain. "It's over," I said firmly, steadying my voice. "Derek confessed everything. With help from Raymond and some other supporters, he was exposed and arrested for what he did. All the debts, affairs, everything. It's finished." A tremulous sigh escaped her, somewhere between anguish and blissful release. "So he'll never hurt me again?" "Never," I said, pulling her close, "and I'll make damn sure that snake never gets within a mile of my family ever again." Jenna stiffened at that, pulling back with a panicked look. "Oh God, Mason! Is he?" "Hey now, it's all right." I raised a soothing hand, unwinding the knot of fear in her gut. "Mason's safe and sound, sweetie. He's with me for now, tucked away from all the ugliness. As soon as you're ready, we'll be a family again." Her hand trembled as it found mine, squeezing with the first embers of a familiar strength flickering back to life in those lost hazel eyes. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you for not giving up on me." I gave her a reassuring look as my own tears flowed freely. "Sometimes revenge is what gets you through the night, baby girl. But for a mother's love?" I pressed my forehead to hers, savoring our reunion as a brilliant new dawn broke on the horizon. That burning light will always lead me home. "So you're taking our home, just like that?" Arlene's voice trembled as she stared at her son, Elliot, and the young woman by his side. Elliot's gaze hardened. "Mom, we've been over this. You promised me the family estate when I turned 30. Well, I'm 30 now, and Iris and I have big plans for the place." Arlene exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Theo. This wasn't the son they'd raised, the one who used to dream of traveling the world, not inheriting property. "Elliot's son," Theo began, his tone calm but firm. "We never made that promise. The estate has been in your mother's family for generations." Iris, Elliot's girlfriend, stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Mr. Wilkins, Elliot has told me of this supposed promise, and we intend to follow through on it." Arlene fought back tears, her heart aching at the thought of losing her beloved ancestral home. "This is absurd. We've never discussed anything like that." "Maybe you don't remember," Iris said coolly, "but we have a legal contract that states otherwise." Elliot nodded, his expression hard. "I'm sorry, Mom, Dad, but this is happening, whether you like it or not." As Arlene watched her son turn and walk away, arm in arm with Iris, she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. This was only the beginning of a battle she never saw coming, a battle to save not just her home, but her family. Over the next few days, the tension in the Wilkins household was palpable. Arlene spent hours poring over old documents, desperate to find any shred of evidence to support Elliot's claim. But there was nothing. "How could he do this to us?" she asked Theo one night, her voice hoarse from crying. Theo pulled her close, his brow furrowed with worry. "I don't know, Arlene, but we can't let them take what's rightfully yours." Arlene nodded, her resolve hardening. She would fight for her home, no matter what it took. A week later, Elliot and Iris arrived unannounced, their expressions smug. "We've given you plenty of time to get your affairs in order," Iris said, her tone icy. "Now we'll be taking over the estate." Arlene felt her heart rate quicken as she studied the young woman before her. There was something calculating, almost predatory in Iris's gaze. "Like hell you will," Arlene shot back, surprising even herself with her vehemence. Elliot's eyes widened. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." But Arlene had made up her mind. She wasn't about to let this conniving woman waltz in and steal her family's legacy. "Listen closely, Iris," she said, her voice low and steady. "This is my home, and if you think you can just take it from me, you've got another thing coming." As Iris's eyes narrowed dangerously, Arlene knew she was in for the fight of her life. But she was ready to protect her family, her history, and everything she held dear. In the days that followed, I quickly discovered that Iris wasn't just a conniving girlfriend, she was a force to be reckoned with, and she had powerful allies on her side. "You might want to rethink this little crusade of yours," she said one afternoon, a smug smile playing on her lips. "My uncle happens to be one of the biggest real estate developers in the city." I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization hit me. If Iris's uncle threw his weight behind her, we could lose more than just the family estate. Theo must have sensed my unease, because he reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "We're not backing down," he said, his voice unwavering. "This is our home, and we'll fight for it." Iris let out a derisive laugh. "Suit yourselves, but don't say I didn't warn you." As she turned and sauntered out, I couldn't help but feel like we were in over our heads. That night, Theo and I sat in the living room, the weight of our predicament hanging heavy in the air. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Theo sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "We can't let them intimidate us, Arlene. We have to stand our ground." I nodded, but deep down, I was terrified. Iris wasn't just some spoiled brat, she was a calculating, ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Over the next few weeks, the tension only escalated. Elliot, once our sweet, kind-hearted son, had become a stranger under Iris's influence. He would show up at the estate unannounced, making demands and veiled threats. "You're only making this harder on yourselves," he said one day, his eyes cold and distant. I wanted to reach out and shake him, to make him see the truth, that Iris was using him, manipulating him for her own gain. But Theo held me back, his grip firm but gentle. "Don't engage," he murmured. "That's what she wants." So I bit my tongue and watched as my son, my flesh and blood, turned his back on us once again. It was during one of these tense encounters that I had an idea, a desperate, last-ditch effort to make Iris see reason. "If you're so confident in your ability to manage this estate," I said, my voice laced with barely contained anger, "then prove it." Iris raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "What did you have in mind?" "We'll give you 3 months," I continued. 3 months to run the estate as you see fit. If you can turn a profit and keep everything running smoothly, we'll consider your claim." Iris's eyes narrowed, but I could see the glimmer of challenge in her gaze. "And if I fail?" "Then you and Elliot walk away," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "For good." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Iris's lips curled into a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You've got a deal." As she shook my hand, her grip firm and unyielding, I knew I had just set into motion a dangerous game, one where the stakes were higher than ever before. But I was determined to win, no matter the cost. With Iris's confidence bordering on arrogance, she wasted no time in taking control of the estate. Within days, she had fired half the staff, claiming they were incompetent and costly. "This place is a mess," she sneered as she strutted through the halls, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "No wonder it's been hemorrhaging money." Theo tried to reason with her, but she would have none of it. "This is my show now, old man," she said, her lips curled into a condescending smile. "And things are going to change around here." I could only watch helplessly as Iris systematically dismantled everything we had built over the years. She brought in her own people, most of whom seemed more interested in lining their pockets than actually running the estate. "She's going to run this place into the ground," Theo muttered one night as we lay in bed, the weight of our worries keeping us both awake. I knew he was right, but I also knew that we had to give Iris a chance, as much as it pained me. If she failed, it would be her own undoing. But as the weeks ticked by, it became increasingly clear that Iris was no mere incompetent novice. She was a cunning, manipulative woman with a knack for skirting the rules and cutting corners. "We need to be more aggressive with our pricing," she announced at a staff meeting one day. "If people can't afford to stay here, that's their problem." I watched in horror as she implemented a series of changes that all but guaranteed the estate would bleed money. Higher rates, fewer amenities, and a general disregard for customer satisfaction. "She's sabotaging herself," Theo whispered to me after the meeting. "She has to be." But I wasn't so sure. There was a calculating gleam in Iris's eye that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. And then, the unthinkable happened. One of our most loyal, long-standing employees, a groundskeeper who had been with us for over a decade, was unceremoniously fired. "You're letting him go?" I asked incredulously, my heart breaking for the kind, hard-working man. Iris shrugged, her expression indifferent. "He's past his prime. We need fresh blood around here." As I watched the man gather his belongings, tears streaming down his weathered face, I felt a white-hot rage simmering beneath the surface. This had gone too far. That night, after Iris had retired to her quarters, I cornered Elliot in the hallway. "How can you let her do this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with emotion. "She's destroying everything we've built, everything your grandfather left us." For a moment, Elliot's gaze flickered with something akin to doubt, but then, just as quickly, it hardened once again. "Iris knows what she's doing, Mom," he said, his tone dismissive. "You need to trust her." As he brushed past me, I knew in that moment that I had lost him, at least for now. But I also knew that I couldn't give up. If Iris wanted a war, she would get one. As the weeks wore on, it became increasingly clear that Iris's true colors were starting to show. The once confident, self-assured woman was now a frazzled, short-tempered tyrant, barking orders at anyone who crossed her path. "This place is a nightmare," she hissed at Elliot one morning, her voice dripping with venom. "I don't know how you ever thought we could make a profit here." Elliot, to his credit, seemed taken aback by her outburst. "Iris, calm down. We just need to stay the course." But Iris was having none of it. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she stalked off, leaving Elliot standing there, a bewildered expression on his face. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the sight. Perhaps now, my son would finally see the truth about his so-called girlfriend. But my satisfaction was short-lived. Over the next few days, Iris's erratic behavior only escalated. She was constantly firing staff, changing policies on a whim, and making rash decisions that only served to drive the estate further into the red. "This is madness," Theo said one night, his brow furrowed with worry. "She's going to bankrupt us at this rate." I nodded grimly, knowing that he was right. But there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder if Iris's actions were all part of some larger scheme. My suspicions were confirmed a few days later when one of the staff members, a young woman named Sarah, approached me with a disturbing revelation. "Mrs. Wilkins," she said, her voice hushed and her eyes darting around nervously, "I think you should take a look at these." In her trembling hands, she held a stack of documents, contracts, invoices, and receipts, all bearing Iris's signature. As I flipped through them, my heart sank. These weren't just bad business decisions. They were outright fraudulent activities, designed to siphon money from the estate and into Iris's own pockets. "How did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah swallowed hard. "I overheard Iris talking on the phone. She was boasting about how she was going to bleed this place dry and take everything for herself." I felt a cold fury wash over me. So that was Iris's game. To deliberately run the estate into the ground, all while lining her own pockets with our money. "That snake," I hissed, my fingers tightening around the damning evidence in my hands. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I knew something wasn't right. That's why I started keeping copies of everything." In that moment, I felt a surge of gratitude for this young woman's bravery and foresight. She had just handed me the ammunition I needed to take Iris down once and for all. As I clutched the documents to my chest, I knew that the time for playing nice was over. Iris had crossed a line, and now she would have to face the consequences. I was going to make sure of it. With the damning evidence in hand, I knew I had to act quickly. Iris was a snake in the grass, and if I didn't expose her soon, she would slither away with everything we had. The first order of business was to confront Elliot. As much as it pained me to see him so blinded by Iris's manipulation, I knew he deserved to know the truth. "Son, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm but tinged with concern. Elliot looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Mom?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. "It's about Iris. I have proof that she's been embezzling funds from the estate." For a moment, Elliot's expression was one of disbelief. But as I laid out the evidence, the fraudulent contracts, the inflated invoices, the paper trail of deceit, his face fell. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be true." But the facts were undeniable, and deep down I knew he could see it too. "I'm sorry, Elliot," I said, reaching out to touch his arm, "but she's been playing you this whole time." Tears welled in my son's eyes, and for a moment I thought he might break down. But then, something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of determination that I hadn't seen in far too long. "That lying bitch," he growled, his fists clenching at his sides. It was in that moment that I knew we had a chance to take Iris down and reclaim what was rightfully ours. But just as we were plotting our next move, a familiar figure stormed into the room, his eyes blazing with fury. It was the groundskeeper Iris had so callously fired, the one who had dedicated years of his life to maintaining our beloved estate. "You need to see this," he said, thrusting a manila envelope into my hands. Inside were pictures, damning photographs of Iris meeting with shady-looking individuals, exchanging what appeared to be stacks of cash. "I took these a few days ago," the groundskeeper explained, his voice trembling with rage. "That woman is up to no good, and I aim to prove it." I felt a surge of gratitude towards this loyal man who had risked everything to expose Iris's misdeeds. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand. "This is exactly what we need." As the groundskeeper nodded and turned to leave, I knew that the tipping point had been reached. Iris's web of lies and deceit was unraveling, and soon she would have nowhere left to hide. Turning to Elliot, I saw a fire burning in his eyes, a determination to right the wrongs that had been committed against our family. "It's time," he said, his voice steely with resolve. "Time to take back what's ours." And in that moment, I knew that we were finally on the path to victory. A victory that had been hard-fought and long overdue. Iris's reign of terror was about to come crashing down around her, and we would be there to watch it all unfold. With the evidence mounting against Iris, I knew it was time to confront her once and for all. I gathered Theo, Elliot, and the loyal staff members who had risked everything to expose her misdeeds. "Are you sure about this, Arlene?" Theo asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "It's the only way. We have to bring her down before she destroys us all." Elliot placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I'm with you, Mom. Let's end this once and for all." Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and marched towards Iris's office, the others trailing close behind. As we approached the door, I could hear her voice, shrill and demanding, as she barked orders at some unseen lackey. Without hesitation, I threw open the door, the damning evidence clutched tightly in my hands. "Enough, Iris," I said, my voice ringing with authority. "The game is over." Iris's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of our little posse. "What is the meaning of this?" she spat, her lip curling in disdain. I held up the stack of documents, letting them speak for themselves. "We know what you've been up to, Iris. The embezzlement, the fraudulent deals, it all stops now." For a moment, Iris's expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. But then, just as quickly, she regained her composure, her mask of arrogance slipping back into place. "You have no proof," she sneered, her eyes darting from one of us to the next. "Just a bunch of baseless accusations." It was then that Elliot stepped forward, his face a mask of steely determination. "That's where you're wrong, Iris," he said, his voice laced with barely contained fury. "We have all the proof we need." He gestured to the groundskeeper, who stepped forward with the envelope of damning photographs. "Care to explain these?" Iris's eyes widened as she took in the incriminating images, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. "You bitch," she hissed, her mask of civility finally shattering. "You think you can take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." But even as the words left her lips, I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. She knew she was cornered, her web of lies finally catching up to her. "It's over, Iris," I said, my voice heavy with finality. "You've lost." Iris opened her mouth to respond, but the words never came. Instead, she simply stared at us, her eyes burning with a potent mix of hatred and defeat. It was in that moment that I knew we had won. Not just the battle for our home, but the war against Iris's deceit and betrayal. As we filed out of her office, leaving her to stew in her own failure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. But even as we celebrated our victory, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Iris was a formidable foe, and I had no doubt that she would try to retaliate in any way she could. Yet as I looked at Elliot, his face alight with determination, and Theo, his eyes shining with pride, I knew that we were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. We were a family, united and unbreakable, and no matter what Iris threw our way, we would face it together, just as we had faced everything else. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Family, loyalty, and the unshakable bond that ties us all together. And with that, I knew that we had already won the most important battle of all. In the aftermath of our confrontation with Iris, a tense silence settled over the estate. We all knew that this was far from over, that the snake we had cornered would likely strike back with everything she had. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Iris resurfaced, her eyes blazing with fury and her lips curled into a snarl of defiance. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You've only made things worse for yourselves." Elliot, to his credit, stood firm, his expression resolute. "It's over, Iris. We have all the evidence we need to take you down." But Iris simply laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Elliot, you sweet, naive fool. Do you really think it's that simple?" Before any of us could react, she whirled on me, her gaze piercing and accusatory. "You've made a grave mistake, Arlene, and I'm going to make sure you pay dearly for it." I felt a flicker of fear in the pit of my stomach, but I refused to let it show. "Are those threats, Iris? Because if they are, you've just sealed your own fate." Iris's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might lunge at me. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted, a sickly sweet smile spreading across her face. "No threats, darling," she purred, her tone dripping with mock sincerity. "Just a friendly warning." With that, she turned on her heel and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of tension and unease in her wake. "She's unhinged," Theo muttered, his brow furrowed with worry. "Who knows what she's capable of?" I nodded grimly, knowing that he was right. Iris was a desperate, cornered animal, and that made her all the more dangerous. But even as the threat of her retaliation loomed over us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the truth had finally come to light. Elliot, my sweet, misguided son, had finally seen Iris for the manipulative, deceitful person she truly was. As the days passed, I could see the weight of his guilt settling heavily upon his shoulders. He would often seek me out, his eyes filled with remorse and regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have listened to you from the start." I pulled him into a tight embrace, my heart aching for the pain he was feeling. "It's all right, Elliot. What matters now is that we've stopped her." But even as the words left my lips, I knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. Iris was a formidable adversary, and I had no doubt that she would stop at nothing to exact her revenge. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the first salvo was fired. A letter arrived from Iris's lawyers threatening legal action and demanding that we drop all charges against her. "They can't be serious," Elliot scoffed, crumpling the letter in his fist. "We have all the evidence we need to bury her." But Theo's expression was grave, his eyes clouded with worry. "Arlene, we can't take this lightly. Iris has connections, and she'll stop at nothing to protect herself." I knew he was right. Iris was a snake, and like any snake, she would strike when we least expected it. But as I looked around at my family, their faces etched with determination and resolve, I knew that we were ready for whatever she threw our way. Because this time, we were fighting not just for our home, but for our very souls. And no matter how hard Iris tried, she would never be able to take that away from us. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and met Theo's gaze, my own eyes burning with a fire that had been stoked by years of betrayal and lies. "Let her try," I said, my voice low and steady. "We're not backing down, not now, not ever." Because in the end, that's what this was all about. Standing our ground, protecting what was rightfully ours, and ensuring that justice was served. And as we braced ourselves for the battle ahead, I knew that no matter what Iris had in store for us, we would face it head-on, united and unbreakable. For that was the true strength of family, a bond that could never be severed, no matter how hard the enemy tried. In the weeks that followed, Iris's threats of legal action proved to be little more than empty posturing. With the mountain of evidence we had against her, even her high-priced lawyers knew they were fighting a losing battle. "It's over, Iris," Elliot said, his voice ringing with finality as we gathered in the estate's grand foyer. "The authorities have everything they need to put you away for a long time." Iris's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. "This isn't the end, Elliot. Mark my words, I'll make you all pay for this." But even as the words left her mouth, I could see the fear flickering behind her eyes. She knew she had been beaten, her carefully constructed facade of deceit crumbling around her. As the authorities led her away in handcuffs, her head held high, but her shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. In the days that followed, Elliot grew increasingly withdrawn, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the weight of his own guilt and shame. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let that woman blind me to everything that was important." I pulled him into a tight embrace, my heart aching for the pain he was feeling. "It's all right, Elliot. What matters now is that we've come through this stronger than ever." But even as the words left my lips, I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. He was a man haunted by his own mistakes, struggling to find his way back to the path he had so carelessly strayed from. It was in those moments that I realized the true cost of Iris's betrayal. She had nearly torn our family apart, her poisonous influence seeping into the very fabric of our lives and leaving a trail of pain and mistrust in its wake. But even as the wounds she had inflicted still stung, I knew that we had a choice: to let her actions define us, or to rise above them and reclaim the bond that had sustained us for so long. And so we chose the latter. With each passing day, we worked to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, to mend the rifts that Iris had so callously created. It wasn't easy, but slowly, surely, we began to heal. Elliot, bless his heart, was the driving force behind our reconciliation. He threw himself into the task of restoring the estate to its former glory, working tirelessly to undo the damage that Iris had wrought. "This is my penance," he would say, his brow glistening with sweat as he toiled away in the gardens or tended to the repairs that had been so long neglected. And as I watched him pour his heart and soul into the task, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was the son I had raised, the one whose loyalty and determination had been momentarily clouded but never truly lost. As the months passed, the estate slowly but surely began to regain its former luster, a testament to the resilience of our family and the unbreakable bond that had seen us through even the darkest of times. And on the day that we finally moved back into our ancestral home, a weight seemed to lift from our shoulders, a weight that had been born of Iris's deceit and the turmoil she had brought into our lives. "We made it," Theo said, his eyes shining with pride as he surveyed the restored grandeur of the estate. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We did, and we'll never let anyone tear us apart again. As we gathered together, a family once more united and whole, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had taken, a journey that had tested us in ways we never could have imagined, but one that had ultimately strengthened the bonds that truly mattered. And as the sun set over our beloved home, casting a warm golden glow over the grounds, I knew that we had emerged from the darkness, stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. For in the end, that was the true lesson we had learned, that family was not just a bond of blood, but a sacred trust that could weather even the fiercest of storms. And with that knowledge firmly in our hearts, we stepped forward into a future that was brighter and more promising than ever before. I stared at the rumpled sheets, a knot forming in my throat as the truth sank in. The lingering scent of sweat and sex hung heavy in the air, a cruel mockery of the life I thought I had. How could he? How could she? "Cynthia." Rick's voice trembled with guilt as he pulled the covers up, his bare chest glistening with perspiration. "It's not what it looks like." I wanted to scream, to lash out at the two people I loved most in this world, but all I could muster was a bitter laugh. "Really? Because it sure as hell looks like you were screwing my little sister in our bed." Kristen's face was buried in her hands, her slender frame shaking with sobs. "Sin, I'm so sorry." "Don't," I snapped, my voice like shattered glass. "Just don't." Rick reached for me, his expression a mask of desperation. "Baby, please, let me explain." I recoiled from his touch, bile rising in my throat. Explain what? That you betrayed me with the one person I should have been able to trust above all others? That you turned our home, our marriage, into a cheap motel room tryst? It was a mistake, he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. A horrible, stupid mistake. It'll never happen again, I swear. I barked out a harsh laugh, raking my fingers through my hair. You're damn right it won't, because we're done, Rick. Over. I want you both out of my house by tomorrow night. Sin, no, Kristen cried, clutching the sheets to her naked body. Please, we never meant to hurt you. Well, you did. The anguish lanced through me like a white-hot blade. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I'll never be able to look at either of you the same again. Rick reached for me again, but I shoved him away, my anger and hurt overriding any lingering love. Don't touch me. Just get your things and go. We're through. As I stormed out, the enormity of what had happened threatened to crush me. My life, my family, everything I held dear, shattered in an instant by the two people I trusted most. The incessant knocking at my door wouldn't stop. I knew it was Rick, begging for another chance like he had been all week. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to shut out his pleas and hollow promises. But a larger part, the part that still foolishly clung to the memories of happier times, compelled me to answer. What do you want, Rick? I sighed, pulling open the door to find him disheveled and bleary-eyed. Sin, please, you have to listen to me. He reached for my hand, but I snatched it away. It was one stupid mistake, that's all, a moment of weakness that'll never happen again. I scoffed, crossing my arms over my chest. With my own sister? How could you do that to me, to us? Tears welled in his eyes as he dropped to his knees. I don't know, baby. I was drunk and angry, and she was there, comforting me. One thing led to another, and before I knew it... He trailed off, burying his face in his hands. God, I'm so sorry. You have to believe me. For a moment, a fleeting moment, I almost did believe him. The anguish in his voice, the raw emotion etched on his face, it tugged at the fragile threads still tying me to this broken man. But then the image of them tangled together, naked and sweating, flashed before my eyes, and a fresh wave of rage washed over me. Get up, I spat, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. Get up and look me in the eye when you're begging for another chance you don't deserve. His eyes were wild, desperate. Sin, I love you. What we have had, it's real. Don't throw it all away because of one horrible lapse in judgment. One lapse? I shook my head in disbelief. Rick, you slept with my baby sister, in our marriage bed. How can I ever trust you again after that kind of betrayal? You can, he insisted, grasping my shoulders. I'll do anything at all to prove myself to you. Just say you'll give me another shot. For a long moment, I searched his eyes for any hint of the man I fell in love with all those years ago. The man who held my hand on our first date, who cried tears of joy when I walked down the aisle, who promised to love and cherish me until the end of our days. But all I saw was a broken shell, a man hollowed out by his own selfish lies and infidelity. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's over, Rick. The papers will be filed in the morning. As I shut the door, blocking out his anguished wails, I felt something inside me harden. He made his choice when he betrayed me so completely. And now it was my turn to choose, to fight for what was left of my life and my dignity. No matter how much it hurt, the cramped bathroom felt suffocating as I stared at the two pink lines glaring back at me. Pregnant. Of all the twists this nightmare could have taken, I never expected this. A harsh laugh escaped my lips as I sank to the cold tile floor, my back against the wall. Of course I would be pregnant with Rick's child in the midst of his affair with Kristen. The universe had quite the cruel sense of irony. Part of me wanted to grab the test and hurl it across the room, to scream and rage against this latest cosmic injustice. But a larger part felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. This baby, innocent and pure, was the one good thing to come from the ashes of my marriage. My child. Mine alone to love and cherish, free from the stain of their father's betrayal. The decision was made before I could second-guess it. I would keep this baby and raise it on my own if I had to. Rick didn't deserve to be part of its life, not after what he'd done. The buzz of my phone shook me from my reverie. Kristen's name flashed across the screen, no doubt another tortured plea for forgiveness to join the dozens already clogging my voicemail. With a surge of anger, I hurled the phone against the wall, watching it shatter into pieces. Sin? Rick's muffled voice came through the door. Everything okay in there? I almost laughed at the absurdity of his question, as if anything could ever be okay between us again. I'm pregnant, I called out, my voice eerily calm. The test just confirmed it. There was a long pause before he responded. Are you sure it's mine? White-hot rage lanced through me at his implication. Of course it's yours, you son of a bitch, I roared, leaping to my feet. Who else's would it be? The door flew open, and he stood there, hands raised in surrender. Sin, I didn't mean it like that. I need to know for sure. Well, you can be damn sure, I spat, shoving past him into the bedroom. I haven't been with anyone else, unlike you. He flinched at the venom in my words, but pressed on. Okay, I believe you. Just please let me be a part of this baby's life. I whirled on him, eyes blazing with fury. After what you did? After destroying everything we built together by screwing my own sister? You don't get that right, Rick. Not anymore. His face crumpled in anguish. Sin, please, I'm begging you, that baby, it's all I have left now. No, I said, my voice hardening to steel. You made your choices, just like I'm making mine. And I choose to raise this child away from the toxicity of your lies and betrayal. We're through. As the tears streamed down his cheeks, I felt something inside me finally break free. The naive, love-struck girl who thought her fairy tale would last forever. In her place stood a woman reborn, hardened by the cruelest of life's realities, yet stronger for having survived it. I was done being the victim. From now on, I would be the author of my own destiny, and Rick would play no part in it. The baby kicked insistently, as if sensing the tension radiating off me. I rubbed my swollen belly, trying in vain to soothe the life growing inside me, a life that would soon be thrust into the chaos of my crumbling world. You can't be serious, Cynthia. Rick's voice was laced with disbelief and more than a hint of anger. Asking for that much in the settlement is highway robbery. I met his gaze levelly, my jaw set. I'm deadly serious. After what you put me through, I deserve every penny. He raked his fingers through his thinning hair, pacing the length of the lawyer's office. But that amount, it'll leave me with next to nothing to start over with. Where's the fairness in that? A harsh laugh escaped my lips. Fairness? You want to talk to me about fairness after you cheated on me with my own flesh and blood? I leaned forward, my eyes boring into his. I bent over backwards to make our marriage work, to build a life with you. And you threw it all away for what? A cheap thrill with my baby sister? Rick flinched as if I'd struck him. Good. I wanted my words to cut deep, to make him feel even an ounce of the pain he'd inflicted on me. Sin, please. He dropped to his knees in front of me, clasping my hands in his clammy grip. I was a fool, an absolute idiot, but you have to believe I never meant to hurt you like this. I love you more than anything. I snatched my hands away, bile rising in my throat. Save it for someone who still believes your lies, Rick. I'm through being made a fool of. His face crumpled, the mask of the repentant husband slipping. So that's it, then? You're just going to take me for everything I've got and leave me destitute? I'm taking what I deserve, I shot back, rising to my feet with effort. A chance to get back on my feet and provide for this baby without having to rely on you for a damn thing. Rick's eyes narrowed to slits. You're making a huge mistake here, Cynthia. Don't think for a second the courts will side with you over this. I matched his glare with one of my own. I have a pretty strong case, as I recall. A cheating husband who lied and betrayed his heavily pregnant wife in the worst way imaginable. I shook my head slowly. I like my chances just fine, thanks. As I turned to leave, the fight seeming to drain from Rick's body, a tiny voice inside whispered that maybe I was going too far, that the settlement figure I'd named was perhaps too steep, too vengeful. But another voice, louder and more insistent, drowned it out. This was what he deserved, I told myself, the consequences of his unforgivable actions. If it broke him, so be it. He'd brought it on himself. He didn't get to play the victim, not this time, not after everything he'd taken from me. The pounding on my door was incessant, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd gotten in weeks. I knew without looking who it would be, the same person who had shattered what little peace remained in my life. Throwing on a robe, I flung open the door to find Kristen standing there, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. What do you want? I spat before she could speak. Here to rub my face in your home-wrecking ways again? She flinched as if I'd struck her. Good. Sin, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you have to hear me out. I don't have to do a damn thing, I shot back, arms crossed over my chest. You made your bed when you slithered into mine with my husband. Now you can lie in it. Tears spilled down her blotchy cheeks. I'm pregnant? Sin. With Rick's baby. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog as I struggled to process them. Of course she was pregnant too. The universe just loved twisting the knife deeper with each new torture. Well, isn't that just perfect? I laughed bitterly. The two lying, cheating snakes get to play family while I raise my child alone. How storybook of you both. No. She reached for me, but I jerked away. No, Sin, you don't understand. I need your help. I stared at her incredulously. My help? After you stabbed me in the back in the worst way imaginable, what makes you think I'd lift a finger to help you? Kristen's eyes were wild, pleading. Because Rick, he wants nothing to do with this baby. He said it'll ruin his chances of getting back together with you. White-hot rage lanced through me at her words. Of course that bastard would try to weasel his way out of this, to pretend the ultimate consequence of his actions didn't exist. Just like he'd tried to pretend his affair was some momentary lapse, a blip to be forgotten. So what? I shrugged, feigning indifference. Sounds like a personal problem to me. You two can sort out your own messes. But I can't do this alone, she wailed, fresh tears streaming down her face. I don't have anyone else, Sin. You're my family. Family. The word was like a physical slap across my face. This snake who had violated the sanctity of my family in the worst way was trying to claim that bond again? After everything? You lost any right to call me family the second you spread your legs for my husband. I hissed, poking her sharply in the chest. As far as I'm concerned, you're just the worthless homewrecker he stepped out with, nothing more. Her face crumpled in anguish, but I was beyond caring. Let her feel the slightest fraction of the pain she'd inflicted upon me. It was the least she deserved. Now get off my porch, I said, my voice dangerously low, and if I ever see your face again, I can't be held responsible for what I might do. As she turned and fled, I slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing through the hall like a gunshot. My hands were shaking, every muscle taut, as the weight of her words finally hit me. Rick was going to be a father again. With her. The idea was like acid burning through my veins. If he thought for 1 second that he could just walk away from this, from them, he had another thing coming. I would make sure he paid for this latest betrayal, if it was the last thing I ever did. The courtroom was deathly silent as the judge cleared his throat, envelope in hand. This was it. The moment that would decide just how far Rick's lies and betrayal had really gone. The DNA results confirm that Mr. Richard Moore. The judge paused, eyes flickering between Rick and a visibly distraught Kristen. Is not the biological father of the child Miss Randall is carrying. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, but I remained motionless, utterly unsurprised. Of course he wasn't the father, just another lie in the tangled web he'd spun. Rick, however, looked as though he'd been struck. What? That's impossible. She said. Liar! Kristen screeched, rounding on him with balled fists. You lied to me, you bastard. Told me it was yours, so I'd leave Sin alone. I watched impassively as the court officers struggled to restrain her, something like pity stirring in my chest. She was just another of his victims. Really, a fool led astray by his silver tongue. The judge pounded his gavel, restoring order. If we could return to the matter at hand. His steely gaze fell on Rick. Mr. Moore, you'd also be wise to take this opportunity to revise the financial statements you submitted during these proceedings. A bead of sweat trickled down Rick's brow as he tugged at his collar. I'm not sure what you mean, Your Honor. Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean. The judge's tone brooked no argument. The tax documents and income statements we subpoenaed paint a very different picture than what you originally claimed. My head whipped around as I studied Rick's ashen face. He couldn't have, could he? Not after everything. But his silence, his refusal to meet my eyes, spoke volumes. You lied. The words slipped out in a hoarse whisper. You lied about your finances, too, to try and cheat me out of what I deserved. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head slowly. In that moment, I saw him for what he truly was, a sniveling coward who would do or say anything to save his own skin. My heart twisted violently in my chest. The judge fixed him with a withering stare. "Mr. Moore, you have committed perjury and fraud upon this court with your falsified financial records. Not only that, but you engaged in a reprehensible pattern of lies and deceit that allowed this entire fiasco to unfold." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in as the courtroom held its collective breath. "Therefore, I am awarding the entirety of the settlement amount requested by Mrs. Moore, in addition to the marital home and all other major assets." His gaze bored into Rick's stunned face. "You have only your own dishonorable actions to blame for these consequences, sir. This ruling is final." The world seemed to tilt wildly around me as the judge's words echoed through the chamber. I'd won. I'd beaten him at his own lying game and taken everything in the process. A hollow victory, to be sure, but a victory nonetheless. As the bailiffs led a shattered Rick away, I caught his eye one last time. Any remnants of the man I'd loved, the man I'd devoted half my life to, were gone, burned away by the flames of his selfish deceptions. In their place was a broken husk, a sobbing wretch brought low by his own karmic reckoning. And as he disappeared through the door, I knew I would never look upon his face again. The spacious home felt cavernous and empty as I wandered its halls, my son Jacob babbling happily in my arms. This place, which had once represented the life Rick and I strived to build together, now stood as a monument to his failures. Every gleaming surface, every expensive furnishing, had been bought with the hard-earned money he tried so desperately to keep from me. The money that was rightfully mine after his countless lies and betrayals. A hollow victory, to be sure, but a victory nonetheless. Jacob's tiny hands patted my cheeks, drawing my attention back to his cherubic face. In that moment, watching his bright eyes crinkle with laughter, I knew I had made the right choice. This house, this life I was building from the ashes, was all for him now. Rick was merely a speck in the rearview mirror, a crucial step on the journey that led me here, but no longer a presence in our lives. I had survived his deceit and emerged stronger, more resilient than I could have imagined. The buzzer rang, shattering the moment's peace. Shifting Jacob to my hip, I made my way to the intercom, the voice identification system cheerily announcing, "Kristen Randall at the gate." I froze, hot anger lancing through me. The audacity of that snake, showing her face here after everything she'd done. I should have known better than to expect her to slink back into the hole she'd crawled out of. "Ma'am?" The AI's chipper voice piped up again. "Shall I admit the visitor or send them away?" Jaw clenched, I stabbed the comm button. "What do you want, Kristen? Here to try and weasel your way back into my good graces again?" There was a pause, then a tremulous sigh. "Sin, please. I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I really need your help." I barked out a harsh laugh. "My help? After you slept with my husband and tried to trap him with a baby that wasn't even his? You've got one hell of a nerve showing up here." I know. Her voice cracked with desperation. "Believe me, I know how badly I've messed up, how much I've hurt you. But Sin, I'm homeless. I've got nowhere else to go." The words hung in the air, deflating my anger for just a moment. As much as I despised her for her actions, she was still my sister, my blood. Could I really turn her away to fend for herself? Jacob gurgled softly, nuzzling my neck, and my resolve hardened once more. She might share my DNA, but she had long since forfeited the honor of being treated like family. "That's not my problem," I said, coldness seeping into my tone. "You made your bed when you betrayed me in the worst way. Now you can lie in it." "Sin, wait," her voice was thick with panic. "I'm pregnant! For real this time! I can't raise this baby on the streets, please!" I recoiled as if struck, bile rising in my throat. Of course she would stoop to that level of deception again, using an innocent child as a pawn in her twisted mind games. "Save your lies, Kristen," I spat, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I don't have anything left to give you. No money, no shelter, no help. You're on your own." As her muffled sobs faded, I slumped against the wall, cradling Jacob close. In that moment, I pitied her even as I reviled her very existence, for she was well and truly alone in this world of her own making. But not me. Never again. I had my son, my beautiful reason for persevering through all the darkness. and as long as he was by my side, I knew I could overcome any challenge, any deception. Rick's betrayal may have tried to break me, but it had also remade me into a fiercer, more uncompromising version of myself. One that would never let anyone jeopardize the life I was building for me and my child. Not Kristen. Not Rick himself. No one. The sun-dappled park was alive with the sounds of children at play, their laughter ringing out across the vibrant green expanse. I smiled as Jacob raced ahead of me, his tiny legs pumping furiously as he chased after a kaleidoscope of bubbles. So much had changed in the 5 years since that fateful night, the one that shattered my world and set me on this new path as a single mother. Yet watching my son's face light up with unbridled joy, I knew all the pain and heartache had been worth it 1,000 times over. "Mommy, Mommy, look how high I can swing!" Jacob's excited voice drew my gaze to the playground, where he was launching himself into the air with reckless abandon. Chuckling, I made my way over, ready to rein in his antics before he gave himself a concussion. "All right, little daredevil, let's take it down a notch before you." The words caught in my throat as my eyes landed on a hunched, disheveled figure sitting alone on a nearby bench. Even from a distance, the stringy hair, sallow complexion, and haunted eyes were instantly recognizable. Rick. A lead weight formed in the pit of my stomach as Jacob continued playing, oblivious to the ghost from our past. Part of me wanted to grab his hand and flee, to shield him from the man who had put us through so much pain and anguish. But another part, the part that had grown stronger and more resilient with each passing year, felt something else stirring inside me. Not anger, nor hatred, but pity. Steeling myself, I made my way towards the bench, my heart pounding in my ears. Up close, the toll of Rick's lies and deceptions was even more stark. His clothes hung loosely, his face etched with lines that made him appear decades older than his years. Well, I said softly, watching as his head snapped up in shock. "If it isn't the master of deception himself, fancy meeting you here." Rick's eyes widened as he took me in, his hands visibly trembling. "See? Cynthia? Is that really you?" "In the flesh," I gestured vaguely at his haggard appearance. "Looks like the last few years haven't been too kind to you, Rick?" He flinched as though I'd struck him, turning his gaze downward in shame. "Yeah, well, I guess that's what happens when you lose everything due to your own stupidity." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, punctuated only by Jacob's peals of laughter in the distance. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at seeing the great lie spinner brought so low, but the larger part simply felt sadness. For the broken man before me, and for the bright future we had once dreamed of building together. "You know," I said at last, "for what it's worth, I did love you once, with everything I had." Rick's shoulders slumped as he nodded jerkily. "I know, believe me, I know, and not a day goes by that I don't regret throwing that all away." "Well, regrets won't change the past." I shrugged, turning to watch Jacob scramble up the slide. "All we can do is try to learn from our mistakes and do better going forward." As if sensing the weight of our conversation, Jacob raced over and flung himself into my arms, his bright eyes shining with adoration. In that moment, I knew I had all the love and joy I would ever need right here. "Who's this, Mommy?" he asked innocently, pointing at Rick. I opened my mouth, 1,000 bitter recriminations rising to my lips. But one look at my son's cherubic face, and I realized Rick's deceptions were in the past. The struggles he had put us through had only served to make me stronger, more resilient, more able to cherish the family I had fought so hard to build. "No one important, baby," I murmured, kissing Jacob's brow. "Just a ghost letting go of its chains. Let's go get some ice cream." As we turned and walked away, leaving Rick to watch with slumped shoulders, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. His mistakes, his lies, they no longer had any power over me or my life. I was free to love, to laugh, to live my life on my own terms, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. I shivered violently as the icy wind whipped across my face, the cold seeping through my thin nightgown and chilling me to the bone. The dim streetlights cast eerie shadows along the deserted sidewalk as I trudged forward, my slippered feet already numb. "I'm done with you, Mom. I never wanted you here. Get out!" Marcus's words echoed in my mind, each one a dagger to my heart. How had it come to this? My own son, the child I had loved and nurtured, throwing me out into the freezing night like a worthless piece of trash. Tears streamed down my face, instantly freezing on my cheeks. I pulled my robe tighter around me, but it did little to block the bitter cold. My joints ached, and my legs felt like lead, but I pressed on. Ethan's house was only a few blocks away. He would help me. He had to. As I walked, memories of my late husband Will flooded my mind, the love of my life taken from me far too soon. He had worked tirelessly to provide for our family, leaving me a comfortable home and a sizable inheritance when he passed. But without him, everything had fallen apart. Marcus and his wife, Lauren, had moved in shortly after Will's death, claiming they only wanted to help me. At first, I had welcomed their assistance, grateful for the company and support, but it soon became clear that their true motives were far more sinister. They treated me like a burden, an inconvenience to be tolerated only for the sake of the wealth I had inherited. They belittled me, ignored my wishes, and even started taking control of my finances. And when I dared to protest, their true colors emerged. Marcus had always had a temper, but I had never seen him so enraged as he was tonight. His face twisted with fury. He had grabbed me by the arm, his grip like a vice, and hurled me towards the door. "You ungrateful old hag," he had snarled. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Lauren, her perfectly made-up face contorted with disdain, had simply stood by and watched, her silence as damning as Marcus's actions. And so here I was, alone and freezing, my own flesh and blood casting me aside like a piece of garbage. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. Ethan would help me. He had to. With renewed determination, I quickened my pace, the icy wind stinging my eyes. Ethan's warm, welcoming home was just up ahead, a sanctuary from the bitter cold and the even colder betrayal of my own family. As I approached his front door, my strength finally failed me. I stumbled, my knees buckling, and collapsed against the doorframe, my trembling fingers desperately pounding on the wood. "Please, Ethan," I silently pleaded. "Please help me." The door flew open, and there stood Ethan, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Mom, you're freezing. What happened?" he exclaimed, immediately ushering me inside. The warmth of his home enveloped me, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled deep within my bones. Claire, Ethan's wife, rushed over, her face etched with concern. "Oh my God, Samantha, you're shivering like a leaf," she fretted, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat, a lump of emotion rendering me momentarily mute. Ethan guided me to the couch, his arm around me, offering silent support. Finally, I found my voice, and the story spilled forth. I told them everything. Marcus's escalating cruelty, his explosive temper, the way he and Lauren had systematically isolated and mistreated me, all in their relentless pursuit of my inheritance. As I spoke, their expressions morphed from shock to outrage. Claire's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. "That bastard," he growled when I had finished, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How dare he treat you like that? You're his mother, for God's sake!" Claire's reaction was equally visceral. "This is unacceptable, Samantha. We can't let them get away with this." Her eyes narrowed, a steely determination settling over her features. "I'm a paralegal. I know people in the legal system. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Ethan nodded emphatically, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "You're safe now, Mom. I won't let them hurt you again." Tears streamed down my cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't born of sorrow or despair. They were tears of relief, of hope, of knowing that I wasn't alone anymore. As Claire made a flurry of phone calls, her voice low and intense, Ethan held me close, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm that had become my life. "We're your family, Mom," he murmured, his words laden with a protective fierceness that momentarily took me aback. "And we're going to make things right." In that moment, I realized just how much I had lost sight of what truly mattered. Marcus and Lauren had systematically stripped me of my dignity, my autonomy, my very sense of self. But Ethan and Claire, with their unwavering love and support, had given me the strength to fight back. As the night wore on and Claire's phone calls yielded promising leads, I felt a newfound sense of determination taking root within me. For too long I had allowed myself to be a victim, cowed by fear and the misguided belief that blood was thicker than water. But no more. With Ethan and Claire at my side, I would stand tall and face the demons that had haunted me for far too long. Marcus and Lauren would soon learn that karma was a fierce mistress, and their misdeeds would not go unpunished. A fire ignited in my belly, a righteous fury that had been dormant for far too long. Justice would be served, one way or another. And as I looked into the determined faces of my loved ones, I knew that this time I wouldn't have to face the battle alone. After a sleepless night spent bolstering my resolve, I found myself back at the house I had once called home. Ethan and Claire flanked me, their presence lending me strength even as dread coiled in my stomach. "You ready for this, Mom?" Ethan asked, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Claire produced a small, discreet recording device, pressing it into my palm. "Keep this on you at all times," she instructed, her voice low and urgent. "We need to document everything." With trembling fingers, I concealed the device in the folds of my robe, taking a deep, steadying breath. Ethan rapped sharply on the door, the sound echoing like a death knell. It swung open, and there stood Marcus, his face twisted into a sneer of disdain. Well, look who crawled back," he sneered. "You should have frozen to death out there." I flinched at his words, but Claire's coaching rang in my ears. "Show no fear. Document everything." "I've come to collect my belongings," I stated, forcing my voice to remain level. Marcus barked out a harsh laugh. "Your belongings? This is my house now, you senile old bat. But fine, take your junk and get out. Not before you finish your chores, though." Chores? The indignity of it all threatened to overwhelm me, but I bit back my retort. Ethan's hand found the small of my back, lending me his silent support. "Just do as he says for now, Mom," he murmured. "We'll get through this." And so I meekly followed Marcus's instructions, my hands shaking as I tackled the menial tasks he hurled my way. Each time he barked a fresh order, the recording device in my robe pocket faithfully captured his vitriol. Throughout it all, Lauren watched with a smug expression, her silence somehow more grating than Marcus's taunts. They treated me like a servant in my own home, belittling me at every turn. At one point, as I struggled to lift a heavy box, Marcus' hand shot out, his meaty fingers clamping around my wrist with bruising force. "Hurry up, you useless old hag," he snarled, his face mere inches from mine. "Or do you need another lesson in respect?" The thinly veiled threat hung in the air, his eyes glittering with a familiar, dangerous light. In that moment, a surge of defiance rose within me, burning away the fear that had kept me paralyzed for so long. "That's enough," I stated, my voice ringing with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "I'll take my things and go, but this isn't over, Marcus, not by a long shot." His eyes widened in surprise, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his features. But it was quickly replaced by his usual bravado. "Is that so?" he scoffed. "And just what do you plan to do about it, old woman?" I said nothing, simply holding his gaze with a newfound resilience. Claire's words echoed in my mind. "We have everything we need. Justice will prevail." As I gathered the last of my belongings, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time in years I felt like I was finally fighting back. Marcus and Lauren might have thought they had me beaten, but they were about to learn a very painful lesson. The meek, downtrodden woman they had tormented was gone, replaced by a force they would soon come to fear. With Ethan and Claire at my side, I was no longer powerless. I was a mother on a mission, fueled by righteous fury and an unshakable determination to see justice served. As we departed, leaving Marcus and Lauren to stew in their toxic arrogance, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for them. They had no idea what was coming, the reckoning that awaited them for their cruelty and greed. But I did, and I could hardly wait. With the evidence securely in our possession, Ethan, Claire, and I made our way to the law offices of Samantha Wilkins, a formidable attorney Claire had connected with through her paralegal network. As we settled into the plush chairs of her office, Miss Wilkins wasted no time getting down to business. She was a no-nonsense woman, her gaze sharp and assessing as she listened to the details of my ordeal. "This is a clear-cut case of elder abuse and financial exploitation," she stated matter-of-factly once I had finished speaking. "With the audio and video evidence you've provided, we have a very strong case against your son and daughter-in-law." Relief washed over me, tempered by a lingering sense of guilt. Marcus might have treated me abysmally, but he was still my child, my flesh and blood. Could I really bring myself to pursue legal action against him? Ethan, ever perceptive, seemed to sense my inner turmoil. "No more turning the other cheek, Mom," he said firmly, reaching across the desk to take my hand in his. "Let justice speak." Claire nodded emphatically. "He had his chance to treat you with respect and decency. Now it's time for him to face the consequences of his actions." Miss Wilkinson's expression softened slightly as she regarded me. "I understand this is a difficult decision, Mrs. Wilson, but your son and his wife have committed serious crimes, both morally and legally. You have every right to seek justice and restitution." Her words rang true, echoing the righteous anger that had been simmering within me since my confrontation with Marcus. For too long, I had allowed familial ties to blind me to the truth. That my own child had become a monster, consumed by greed and entitlement. "What are the potential penalties they could be facing?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turbulent emotions swirling within me. Miss Wilkins didn't mince words. "Given the severity of the abuse and the financial crimes involved, we're looking at potential jail time, hefty fines, and the loss of any claim to your assets or inheritance." A tremor ran through me at the thought of Marcus behind bars, but I quickly pushed it aside. He had brought this upon himself through his own despicable actions. "Good," I said, lifting my chin defiantly. "It's time he learned that actions have consequences." Ethan beamed at me, pride shining in his eyes. Claire, too, looked immensely pleased, nodding her approval. Over the next hour, Miss Wilkins outlined our legal strategy, explaining the intricate process we would need to follow to build an ironclad case. It was a daunting prospect, but with each minute that ticked by, my resolve only grew stronger. No more cowering in fear, no more allowing myself to be victimized by those who were supposed to love and protect me. This was my life, my hard-earned legacy, and I would be damned if I let Marcus and Lauren continue to trample all over it. As we departed the law offices, Ethan pulled me into a fierce embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're finally taking a stand, and we'll be with you every step of the way." Claire chimed in, her expression one of pure admiration. "Those two have no idea what's coming for them. They're about to learn that karma is a force to be reckoned with." A small, grim smile tugged at my lips as I looked between my son and daughter-in-law. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose, a fire ignited within me that refused to be extinguished. Marcus and Lauren thought they could bully and manipulate their way through life, trampling over anyone who stood in their path to wealth and power. But they were about to discover that this frail, meek old woman had finally found her backbone. And I intended to make them regret ever crossing me. In the weeks that followed, our legal team worked tirelessly to build an airtight case against Marcus and Lauren. Every piece of evidence was meticulously catalogued, every potential witness interviewed and deposed. Through it all, my newfound determination never wavered. If anything, each new revelation, every sordid detail that came to light about my son and daughter-in-law's misdeeds, only served to further stoke the flames of my righteous anger. It was during one such meeting with Ms. Wilkins that we received a bombshell piece of information, courtesy of Claire's tenacious investigation skills. "I've uncovered something that might help explain Marcus and Lauren's desperation," she announced, a grim look on her face as she slid a stack of financial records across the table. Miss Wilkins' brow furrowed as she scanned the documents, her frown deepening with each passing minute. Finally, she looked up, her expression grave. "These records show a pattern of reckless spending and mounting debt, all concealed from you, Samantha," she stated, her voice laced with a quiet fury. "It would appear that your son's motivations went far beyond simple greed. He was drowning in a sea of his own making, and he saw your inheritance as his lifeline." A sickening realization washed over me as the pieces fell into place. Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior, his desperation to gain control over my finances, it all made sense now. He was a man backed into a corner, lashing out like a rabid animal in his desperation to escape the consequences of his own actions. Ethan slammed his fist on the table, his face contorted with rage. "That lying, manipulative bastard," he seethed. "He was using Mom as his own personal piggy bank this whole time." I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. Not only had he robbed me of my dignity and sense of security, but he had also systematically drained me of the financial stability my beloved Will had worked so hard to provide. In that moment, any lingering shred of sympathy or familial affection I might have harbored for my eldest son evaporated. He was no longer the bright-eyed little boy I had once doted on. He was a monster, consumed by greed and self-interest, willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood on the altar of his own hubris. "They think they can just bully their way out of this," Miss Wilkins stated, her voice cutting through my tumultuous thoughts. "They're about to be in for a rude awakening." Her words resonated deep within me, sparking a renewed sense of determination. Marcus and Lauren had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated the indomitable spirit of a mother scorned. As the court date loomed ever closer, our team doubled down on our efforts, leaving no stone unturned in our quest for justice. I, too, played my part, scouring through old records and documents, determined to uncover any shred of evidence that could be used against my traitorous son and his equally despicable wife. The tension was palpable, the weight of the impending battle weighing heavily upon us all. But in those quiet moments when doubt threatened to creep in, I would remind myself of the strength that had carried me this far. The unbreakable bond I shared with Ethan and Claire, the unwavering support of our legal team, and the knowledge that I was finally taking a stand against those who had wronged me so grievously. Marcus and Lauren might have thought they could bully and manipulate their way out of this mess, but they were sorely mistaken. The tides had turned, and they were about to face the full force of a mother's wrath, fueled by years of pain and betrayal. No more cowering in fear, no more allowing myself to be a victim. This was my moment, my chance to reclaim the life and dignity that had been so cruelly stripped from me. And as the courtroom doors loomed ahead, I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that justice would finally be served. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. As I stepped into the courtroom, flanked by Ethan and Claire, a hush fell over the gallery. All eyes were upon us, the spectators no doubt sensing the palpable tension that hung in the air. Marcus and Lauren were already seated at the defendant's table, their expressions a studied mix of boredom and disdain. But I could see the flicker of uncertainty in my son's eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw as he caught sight of me. Good, I thought grimly. Let him squirm. Miss Wilkins wasted no time in laying out our case, her opening statement a masterful blend of facts and emotional resonance. She painted a vivid picture of the abuse and exploitation I had endured, holding nothing back as she methodically outlined the evidence against Marcus and Lauren. When the first audio recording was played, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence, punctuated only by Marcus's venomous words echoing from the speakers. "Hurry up, you useless old hag, or do you need another lesson in respect?" A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, and I couldn't help but steal a glance at my son. His face had drained of color, his bravado momentarily shaken as the full weight of his actions was laid bare for all to witness. But it was only the beginning. Over the next few hours, a damning portrait emerged, one of greed, cruelty, and utter disregard for the most sacred of familial bonds. Video footage showed Marcus physically intimidating me, his towering form looming over my frail stature as he hurled insults and threats. Witness after witness took the stand, corroborating my accounts of the emotional and financial abuse I had endured. Neighbors testified to hearing raised voices and heated arguments emanating from my former home, while financial experts broke down the intricate web of deceit Marcus had woven in his quest to drain my inheritance. Through it all, Lauren remained stoic, her perfectly coiffed veneer never slipping. But Marcus grew increasingly agitated, his mask of indifference cracking with each new piece of damning evidence. It all came to a head during the cross-examination, when the prosecution's line of questioning backed him into a corner, forcing him to confront the true depths of his depravity. "So, let me get this straight, Mr. Wilson," the prosecutor said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You systematically isolated and abused your own mother, all in the hopes of gaining control over her finances to cover up your own reckless spending and mounting debts?" Marcus visibly bristled, his face flushing an angry crimson. "That's a lie!" he snarled, his voice rising in desperation. "I was just trying to help her. to protect her assets. The prosecutor arched an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. Is that so? Then how do you explain the recordings of you threatening physical violence against her? Or the financial records clearly indicating that you had already begun siphoning funds from her accounts for your own personal use? A muscle twitched in Marcus's jaw as he struggled to formulate a response, his eyes darting wildly around the courtroom. In that moment, he looked every bit the cornered animal, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his own lies and deceit. You can't prove any of that, he finally spat, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. But the prosecutor simply smiled, a cold, predatory gleam in his eye. I believe the evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Wilson. Your lies are over. The truth is undeniable. As Marcus erupted into a fit of impotent rage, hurling insults and accusations that only further condemned him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. The monster who had tormented me for so long was finally being unmasked, his true nature laid bare for all to see, and as the judge called for order, his gavel ringing out like a death knell, I knew that justice was finally within my grasp. The long, arduous battle was nearly over, and I had no doubt that victory would be ours. The courtroom fell deathly silent as the judge prepared to deliver his verdict. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation, and the weight of the evidence that had been so meticulously laid out before him. Marcus and Lauren sat rigidly at the defendant's table, their faces pale masks of forced indifference. But I could see the fear flickering in my son's eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands betraying the bravado he so desperately clung to. Good, I thought grimly. Let him squirm. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom with an impassive weight. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, he began, his voice ringing out with a clarity that seemed to echo off the very walls, I have no choice but to find the defendants, Marcus Wilson and Lauren Wilson, guilty on all counts. A hushed murmur rippled through the gallery, but I remained utterly still, my focus locked solely on the man who had once been my beloved child. Marcus's jaw clenched tightly, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table with a vice-like grip. The judge continued, his words measured and precise. The crimes committed against Samantha Wilson were nothing short of reprehensible, a gross violation of the most sacred of familial bonds, driven by greed and a callous disregard for human decency. With each passing second, Marcus's composure crumbled a little more, his mask of indifference fracturing like a fragile shell. Lauren, too, seemed to shrink in on herself, her perfectly coiffed veneer finally slipping as the reality of their situation set in. In addition to the emotional and psychological trauma inflicted upon the victim, the judge went on, the financial exploitation and fraudulent activities uncovered during this trial warrant severe consequences. He leveled his gaze squarely at Marcus, his expression one of stern condemnation. Mr. Wilson, your actions have shown a blatant disrespect for the law and a complete lack of remorse for the suffering you have caused. As such, I am sentencing you to a term of 5 years in state prison, along with a substantial fine to be paid as restitution to your mother. Marcus erupted, his chair clattering to the floor as he surged to his feet. This is a travesty, he bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. You can't do this to me. The courtroom descended into chaos as bailiffs rushed to restrain the enraged man, his howls of protest echoing off the walls. Lauren remained frozen in her seat, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently as she watched the scene unfold. Through it all, I remained a silent observer, a strange sense of calm washing over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of months of pain and struggle reckoning that Marcus had brought upon himself through his own despicable actions. As my son was finally dragged from the courtroom, his curses and threats ringing in our ears, the judge turned his attention to Lauren. As for you, Mrs. Wilson, he said, his voice laced with contempt, your role in this sordid affair cannot be understated. While you may not have been the primary instigator, your complicity and willful ignorance make you just as culpable. Lauren flinched as if she had been struck, her perfectly composed facade finally shattering under the weight of the judge's condemnation. As such, I am sentencing you to a term of 3 years in state prison, to be followed by a substantial probationary period. the judge continued. Furthermore, you are hereby ordered to pay a significant fine as restitution to the victim, and all assets acquired through ill-gotten means will be seized and returned to their rightful owner. A strangled sob escaped Lauren's lips, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the full gravity of her situation crashed down upon her. In that moment, she looked small and pitiful, a far cry from the arrogant, entitled woman who had once lorded over my life with such disdain. But I felt no pity for her, nor for the man who had once been my beloved son. They had brought this upon themselves, and now they would face the consequences of their actions, a hard-won lesson in the true meaning of karma. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the spectators buzzing with the excitement of the day's events, I felt a sense of profound relief wash over me. The long, arduous battle was finally over, and justice had prevailed. Ethan and Claire enveloped me in a fierce embrace, their faces shining with pride and vindication. "You did it, Mom," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood up to them, and you won." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. "Justice will find you, whether you welcome it or not," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength and conviction. And as we stepped out into the warm embrace of the day, I knew that a new chapter was beginning. One where I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, unburdened by the weight of betrayal and exploitation. The path ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was a survivor, a fighter, and I would never again allow myself to be a victim. The battle was won, and the war was finally over. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of activity, as Marcus and Lauren were forced to vacate my home under the court's orders. With each box they packed, each remnant of their poisonous presence that was removed, I felt a little lighter, a little more free. Ethan and Claire were by my side every step of the way, their support and guidance invaluable as I began the process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Together, we meticulously went through every room, every drawer, every nook and cranny, purging the space of the toxic energy that had lingered for far too long. As the last of Marcus and Lauren's belongings were finally carted away, Ethan pulled me into a fierce embrace. "The ghosts of the past are gone, Mom," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back to your home." Tears stung my eyes, but for once they were born not of sorrow or despair, but of relief. A cathartic release of all the pain and anguish I had endured at the hands of those who were supposed to love and protect me. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan, Claire, and their children became a constant, joyful presence in my life, filling the once empty halls with the sound of laughter and love. Their frequent visits were a balm to my weary soul, a reminder that I was no longer alone, no longer forced to cower in the shadows of my own home. As the physical scars of Marcus and Lauren's occupation faded, the emotional wounds began to heal as well. With the help of a therapist recommended by Claire, I slowly unpacked the trauma I had endured, confronting the fear and self-doubt that had allowed me to become a victim in the first place. It wasn't an easy journey, but each small victory, every step forward on the path to reclaiming my sense of self, filled me with a newfound strength and resilience. I was no longer the meek, downtrodden woman who had allowed herself to be systematically stripped of her dignity and autonomy. I was a survivor, a fighter, and I would never again let anyone hold that kind of power over me. As the months passed, news of Marcus and Lauren's legal troubles began to trickle in, each update a bittersweet reminder of the price they had paid for their greed and cruelty. Claire, ever the tenacious investigator, kept me apprised of every development, her face glowing with a sense of grim satisfaction each time a new piece of evidence came to light. "They're getting everything they deserve," she would say, her voice laced with a quiet fury. And then some. I couldn't argue with her assessment. As painful as it was to watch my own son crumble under the weight of his misdeeds, a part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences, a harsh lesson in the true meaning of karma. But even as the legal battles raged on, my focus remained firmly on the present, on the hard-won sanctuary I had reclaimed for myself. With each passing day, the echoes of Marcus and Lauren's reign of terror faded a little more, replaced by the warmth and laughter of a true family, one built on love, respect, and an unbreakable bond that no amount of cruelty or betrayal could ever hope to sever. As I stood in the living room one evening, surrounded by Ethan, Claire, and their children, I couldn't help but marvel at the transformation that had taken place. The once oppressive silence had given way to a cacophony of joy and laughter, the shadows banished by the radiant glow of love and acceptance. This was my life, my legacy, a hard-won victory snatched from the jaws of despair and suffering. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had stood by me through it all, I knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, I would never again be alone. The battle was over, the war had been won, and I had emerged from the ashes a stronger, more resilient version of myself. A phoenix rising, reborn in the flames of my own indomitable spirit. "Get away from my son, you psycho bitch!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, placing myself between Candace and Caleb. Her eyes were wide and crazed, hands outstretched as if to snatch him away from me. Caleb clung to my leg, whimpering in fear. "Mommy, I don't want to go with the mean lady." Candace's perfectly made-up face contorted with rage. "He's my nephew. I'll take him whenever I want." Her diamond-encrusted fingers closed into fists. This wasn't the first time my sister-in-law had tried to force her way into my life and make decisions about my child, but her behavior was becoming more unhinged by the day. "You're delusional, Candace. Caleb is terrified of you." I pulled my son closer, glaring at the woman I once naively considered family. Candace opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of a car door slamming outside cut her off. "Candace, what's going on?" My brother Marcus's voice preceded him through the front door. "Oh, Marcus, thank God you're here." Candace instantly transformed into the picture of a devoted wife. "Your insane sister is keeping my nephew from me again." I wanted to scream at the blatant lie, but Marcus turned his stern gaze on me before I could speak. "Really, Raina? Candace has every right to see Caleb. She barged in here ranting like a lunatic." I shot back, unwilling to back down. "Ask Caleb what she did." "Don't," Candace scoffed loudly. "Please, we both know that boy will just repeat whatever lies his trashy mother tells him." The venom in her voice shouldn't have surprised me, yet the insult still felt like a slap across the face. Candace had been looking down on me and my lower-class existence for years. Marcus sighed heavily. "We're not doing this again, you two. Candace, let's go home." "But Marcus," she began to protest. "Now," he stated with finality, shooting me a disapproving glare before leading his wife out. As the door slammed behind them, I finally released the breath I'd been holding. Caleb was still trembling against me. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, smoothing his hair. "The mean lady is gone now. For today, at least." But deep down, I knew this war with Candace was just beginning. The next morning, I tried to shake off the previous day's events as I got Caleb ready for school. He was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual endless stream of chatter replaced by nervous glances towards the front door. "You don't need to worry, sweetie," I assured him, packing his Spider-Man lunchbox. "Candace isn't allowed to take you from me." Caleb nodded slowly, but his brow remained furrowed. At 6 years old, he'd already experienced too much of his aunt's volatility. My thoughts drifted to my older brother Marcus as I drove Caleb to elementary school. How could he continue enabling Candace's increasingly disturbing behavior? Then again, he'd always been blind to her faults. I remembered when they first started dating in college. Even then, Candace's obsession with status and wealth was on full display. She'd relentlessly mock my second-hand wardrobe, her perfectly plucked eyebrows raised in judgmental disdain. "You'd look so much prettier if you put in a little effort, Raina," she'd sneer with a cruel smirk. "Marcus deserves a real woman, not some dowdy charity case." I grit my teeth, gripping the steering wheel tighter. All these years later, and her elitist taunts still stung. Candace came from an obscenely rich family, born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She took perverse pleasure in reminding me that I'd never be in her social stratosphere. After graduation, Marcus landed a high-paying corporate job, and Candace wasted no time locking him down in marriage. I'd never seen two people more mismatched joined together in supposed holy matrimony. Marcus was so blinded by Candace's looks and the lure of her family's money that he ignored all the red flags: her explosive temper, irrational jealousy, and unsettling mood swings. I tried warning him, but he brushed it off as bridal stress. Shaking my head, I pulled into the school drop-off loop and gave Caleb a reassuring hug. Have a great day, okay? Don't let mean Aunt Candace ruin it for you. He nodded again, forcing a small smile before heading inside. My heart ached for him. Caleb was such a sweet, gentle boy. He didn't deserve to be subjected to Candace's toxic behavior. As I drove home, my mind raced with memories of the countless times Candace had belittled and mocked me over the years. Her cruelty only intensified after Caleb was born, as if she couldn't stand sharing Marcus's attention and affection. I pulled into my driveway, gripping the steering wheel as flashes of yesterday's confrontation replayed in my mind. The way Candace's eyes had bulged with deranged entitlement as she tried to take my son. Her venomous insults about me being trashy. Something had to be done about her accelerating mental instability before she did real harm. I was tired of being her emotional punching bag. If Marcus refused to see the truth about his wife, I'd make him open his eyes, one way or another. That evening, my parents came over for their weekly family dinner. As I set the table, I could hear Caleb chattering away in the living room, no doubt regaling them with tales from first grade. "Raina, is everything okay, honey?" my mom asked with a concerned frown as she entered the kitchen. Caleb mentioned something about Candace showing up yesterday. I sighed heavily, recounting the unhinged confrontation to my horrified parents. Dad's brow furrowed deeper with each detail. "That woman is completely unstable," he finally said, shaking his head. "I've been telling Marcus for years that she needs professional help." "Well, he's made it quite clear he doesn't want to hear it," I replied bitterly. "He's so obsessed with maintaining their perfect life that he refuses to see Candace for who she really is." Mom reached out and gave my arm a comforting squeeze. "You can't reason with delusional people, sweetheart. All you can do is protect yourself and Caleb." I managed a tight smile, deeply grateful for their unconditional support. At least my family could see Candace's toxicity for what it was. An hour later, we were all seated around the dining table, enjoying the meal I'd prepared. Caleb's endless chatter filled the room, putting me at ease as it always did. That is, until the doorbell rang. I immediately tensed, a knot forming in my stomach. "Please, not here. Not now." "I'll get it," Dad offered gruffly, kissing the top of Mom's head before heading to the front door. Seconds later, the unmistakable sound of Candace's shrill voice reached my ears. "Well, if it isn't the low-class family reunion," she crowed with a derisive laugh as she pushed past Dad into the dining room. My blood immediately began to boil at the insult directed at my parents. Candace, however, seemed utterly unfazed by her rude behavior as usual. "What an absolute dump you live in, Raina," she continued, wrinkling her surgically enhanced nose as she surveyed my modest home. "I guess beggars can't be choosers, though. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after yesterday." I managed through gritted teeth. Candace simply rolled her eyes. "Please don't act so victimized. I'm here to spend quality time with my nephew, like any good aunt would want." "Over my dead body," I shot back vehemently. In the blink of an eye, Candace's demeanor shifted. Her icy glare landed directly on Caleb, who shrank back in his chair. "Well, well, if it isn't the little liar himself," she hissed, taking a menacing step towards him. That was the final straw. "Get out of my house!" I yelled, placing myself between her and my petrified son. "This isn't over, Raina," Candace snarled as Dad ushered her towards the door. "Not by a long shot." The venom in her parting words sent a chill down my spine. In that moment, I knew this conflict had escalated to a dangerous new level. There would be no more neutrality. It was us, or her. A few weeks later, the annual Baxter family birthday bash for Marcus rolled around. Despite my parents' protests, I decided to attend, if only to keep an eye on Candace's unhinged behavior around Caleb. The party was held at Marcus and Candace's ostentatious mansion, because of course it was. As I pulled up to the circular driveway lined with impeccably trimmed hedges, I felt grossly underdressed in my modest sundress and flats. The other guests' designer labels and dripping jewels made me self-conscious. "Just ignore them, sweetie," I told Caleb as I walked him inside, already bracing myself for Candace's inevitable insults about my appearance. Sure enough, as soon as we entered the lavishly decorated living room, her shrill voice cut through the crowd. "Oh, look who decided to grace us with her presence. Cinderella herself." A trill of mocking laughter followed from the cluster of identically coiffed women surrounding her, all clutching boutique shopping bags. I felt my cheeks flush as their judging eyes raked over my simple outfit. "Nice of you to take a break from scrubbing floors, Raina," Candace continued, sauntering over with a wicked grin. "I almost didn't recognize you without your rags on." Swallowing hard, I fought the urge to hurl my drink in her smug face. I couldn't let her get a rise out of me, not in front of all these strangers. Caleb clutched my hand tighter, sensing the tension. "Happy birthday, Marcus," I forced myself to say as my brother approached, hoping he'd run interference before things escalated. "Thanks for coming," he replied stiffly. With a resigned sigh, he turned to Candace. "Do you have to start with her already? It's supposed to be my day." "Oh, I'm just having a bit of harmless fun." Candace responded with a dismissive hair toss. "Raina knows I'm joking, don't you, sis?" The venom in her syrupy tone made my skin crawl. I opened my mouth to protest, but Marcus cut me off. "You know how Candace gets. Just ignore her." He pulled me into an awkward side hug, his eyes pleading for me not to make a scene. Grinding my molars, I managed a terse nod. I'd been putting up with Candace's jokes for over a decade. What was one more night of torture for Marcus's sake? As the party stretched on, Candace's digs grew increasingly more pointed and more audible. She'd pause meaningfully whenever I walked past, her cronies stifling snickers behind monogrammed clutches. Finally, it was time for Marcus to open gifts. Candace, of course, had to make a grand spectacle of her lavish present. "Here you are, birthday boy," she trilled, placing a small box wrapped in shimmering paper into his hands. "I can't wait to see your face." Marcus obliged, tearing off the wrapping to reveal a sleek designer watch, likely worth more than my entire yearly salary. "It's beautiful, babe," he murmured, pulling Candace in for a kiss as their sycophantic audience cooed. I felt a pang in my chest as I watched them, wondering if I'd ever find someone who could love me like that. My gaze drifted down to the modest little gift bag in my hands, filled with a few inexpensive golf accessories I knew Marcus would appreciate. "Well, Raina?" Candace's shrill voice shattered my thoughts. "Don't you have something for the birthday boy, too?" All eyes turned towards me. Feeling my cheeks burn, I hesitantly stepped forward and handed Marcus the gift bag, mumbling a quiet, "Happy birthday." "Wow, how generous," Candace snarked loudly as he pulled out the mundane golf balls and tees. "I'm sure he'll just cherish that dollar store junk forever." The room's judgmental silence was deafening. Tears of humiliation stung my eyes as I avoided Marcus's pitying gaze, wishing I could simply melt into the floor. Clutching Caleb's hand, I turned and fled from the room, Candace's jeering laughter echoing in my ears. As I reached the front door, one thought crystallized in my mind with cold, hard clarity. This had gone on for far too long. It was time to make that wretched woman pay. The humiliation from Marcus's birthday party hung over me like a dark cloud for days afterward. I couldn't shake the memory of Candace's mocking laughter, the disdainful glances from her vapid socialite friends. I knew I should have been used to her cruelty by now. But having my modest gift so publicly ridiculed in front of my own brother stung more than I cared to admit. As I dropped Caleb off at school one morning, I found myself gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. That smug, heartless woman had gone too far this time. Something had to be done. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the passenger door opening. I turned to see my mom climbing into the car, a look of grim determination on her face. "Good, you're still here," she said without preamble. "We need to talk about Candace." I felt myself tense instinctively at the mention of her name. "What about her?" "Raina, this has gone on for far too long," Mom stated, her tone broking no argument. "The way she treated you at Marcus's party was the final straw for me." Swallowing hard, I slowly nodded in agreement. "I know. Believe me, I know. That woman is unhinged," Mom continued, her voice lowering to a fierce whisper. "Her behavior isn't normal, sweetie. It's becoming dangerous." My chest tightened as disturbing images of Candace's crazed eyes flashed through my mind from our last confrontation. "You're right. I'm just so afraid of what she's capable of, especially around Caleb." Mom reached over and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Which is why we can't just sit back and let her keep terrorizing this family. It's time we take a stand." Her determined words ignited something inside me. a spark of righteous indignation I hadn't felt in years. She was absolutely right. I'd been a passive victim of Candace's abuse for far too long, all in the name of keeping the peace with Marcus. But after her deplorable display at the party, something inside me had shifted. The gloves were finally coming off. "You're right, Mom," I said, feeling a surge of courage course through me. "I'm done being Candace's personal punching bag. It's time to fight back." A small smile played across Mom's lips, and I could have sworn I detected a hint of pride in her eyes. "That's my girl. So, what's the plan?" As I began mapping out my first steps towards revenge, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. No more cowering in fear, no more turning the other cheek. This was war, and I didn't intend to lose. "Well, for starters, we need to open Marcus's eyes to who Candace really is," I declared, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "He's been blindly defending her for too long." Mom arched an eyebrow. "You know your brother better than anyone. What will it take for him to finally see the truth?" A muscle twitched in my jaw as I considered her question. I knew exposing Candace's mental instability to Marcus would be an uphill battle. But this time, I was ready to fight with everything I had. "Don't worry," I stated with finality. "I have a few ideas to make him wake up and smell the venom. Candace wants a war?" A hard smile crossed my lips. She's about to get one. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake with a start. My heart pounded as I sat upright in bed, straining to hear any other noise over the thundering of blood in my ears. Then, a piercing scream shattered the eerie silence. "Caleb!" I gasped, cold dread seizing my body as I recognized my son's terrified cry. Throwing off the covers, I raced down the hallway towards his bedroom, half blinded by panic. As I threw open the door, a chilling sight stopped me dead in my tracks. Caleb cowered in the corner, his little body trembling uncontrollably as shards of broken glass and splintered wood littered the floor around him. The window had been completely shattered, tiny razor-sharp shards glittering in the moonlight like deadly confetti. Mommy," he whimpered between ragged sobs, eyes wide with fear. In that moment, I didn't think I'd ever seen him look so small and vulnerable. "It's okay, baby. I'm here," I managed to force out, my voice shaking as I scooped him up protectively in my arms. He clung to me like a lifeline, his tears soaking through my nightshirt. Rocking him gently, I scanned the wreckage of his room with mounting horror. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. It was a targeted attack. But by who? And why would anyone want to hurt my sweet little boy? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, driving the air from my lungs. There was only one person unhinged enough to do something this twisted: Candace. As the weight of her depravity sank in, a cold fury began replacing the fear coursing through my veins. That sadistic bitch had gone way too far this time. Putting her jealous hands on me was one thing, but threatening the life of my child? That was unforgivable, unthinkable, inexcusable. "Shh, it's going to be okay," I whispered fiercely into Caleb's hair, hugging him even tighter. I would get to the bottom of this, and make damn sure Candace paid for whatever she'd done, even if it was the last thing I ever did. The next few hours passed by in a blur of police questioning and cleaning up the shattered glass. I must have recounted the same details a dozen times, desperately trying to piece together any clues that could implicate Candace. Marcus showed up at some point, his usual slicked-back hair disheveled as he embraced us both. "Thank God you two are all right," he murmured shakily. "Who would do something like this?" I opened my mouth, ready to unleash all my pent-up rage and suspicion about his twisted wife, but the words never came. One look at Caleb's red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips, and I knew I couldn't put him through that emotional trauma again. Not tonight. So instead, I forced a tight smile and lied through my teeth. "I have no idea. Some punk kid's playing a sick prank, I guess." Marcus sighed heavily, scrubbing a hand down his face. "Jesus, what is this world coming to?" He pulled us both in for a fierce hug, oblivious to the fact that the real monster was much closer than he realized. As his strong arms enveloped us, I caught a whiff of Candace's sickly sweet perfume lingering on his shirt. A chilling reminder that I was anything but safe, even within this embrace. Meeting my son's haunted gaze over Marcus's shoulder, a hard knot of determination formed in the pit of my stomach. Whoever was responsible for this attack was going to pay dearly. If it really was Candace behind this twisted act, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because I wasn't just going to expose her malicious lies to Marcus, I was going to utterly destroy her. In the weeks following the attack on Caleb's room, I became a woman possessed. Every waking moment was consumed by the burning desire to make Candace pay for what she'd done. I knew in my bones she was behind it, even if I didn't have concrete proof yet. The smashed window, the threatening message it sent, it reeked of her pathological mind games and escalating instability. She was unraveling and lashing out in increasingly dangerous ways. But this time, I was ready. I'd been pushed to my limit one too many times by that sadistic woman. No more turning the other cheek, no more playing the victim. It was time to fight fire with fire. I started documenting every vindictive slight, every backhanded insult Candace had ever hurled my way over the years. Scouring my emails, texts, even old social media posts, I meticulously compiled evidence of her toxic behavior and disturbing obsession with me. A paper trail that revealed a clear pattern of derangement. I also began carefully cataloging any eyewitness accounts from friends and family who'd been subjected to her outbursts and mood swings. My parents were able to recount dozens of incidents, as were some of Marcus's more clear-eyed coworkers. With each new data point I uncovered, a damning portrait began to take shape. One of a deeply troubled woman whose envy towards me had mutated into a full-blown mental disorder. Someone for whom no attack was off limits in order to satiate her twisted need for vengeance. Someone who, if left unchecked, could easily snap again and place Caleb's life in danger. That thought alone was enough to fuel my crusade, no matter how underhanded or invasive my tactics became. I started documenting Candace's daily routines, combing her social media for any clues about her deteriorating state of mind. I even went as far as staking out her weekly Pilates class, determined to catch her in the act of an unhinged outburst. I knew Marcus would never believe any of it without proof, hard evidence that he couldn't simply dismiss or rationalize away. His loyalty to his wife was that strong, that blind. But I was going to shatter that delusion once and for all, no matter how much it devastated him. Because in the end, exposing Candace's true nature was the only way I could ensure Caleb's safety. She'd taken her twisted games too far, and I was the only one willing to stop her reign of terror. As I pored over the incriminating materials late one night, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had her. I finally, truly had her. The paper trail didn't lie. It showed a clear, undeniable pattern of mental illness that even Marcus couldn't ignore. Leaning back in my chair, I couldn't resist the hard smile that crept across my face. Candace had been drunk on her wealth and privilege for far too long, blind to consequences. She'd alienated and attacked everyone around her in her downward spiral, leaving behind a wake of destruction. Well, now it was time to reap what she'd sown. The old saying about karma was true. It really was a bitch. And Candace was about to feel its full wrath. I just hoped Marcus could find it in himself to forgive me when this was all over. Taking down his deranged wife would devastate him, but it was a necessary evil to protect my son. My family. No matter how much collateral damage it caused, I knew one thing for certain. Candace's world was about to come crashing down around her, and I was going to be the one swinging the wrecking ball. It was the night of Candace's weekly book club meeting at her mansion. The perfect opportunity to catch her alone and finally unleash the bombshell I'd been meticulously assembling for weeks. As I pulled up to the imposing iron gates, my heart was pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, when I could shatter her delusional world once and for all. Clutching the bulging manila envelope filled with documented proof of her mental illness, I took a steadying breath before ringing the call box. Seconds later, Candace's saccharine voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes? Who is it?" "It's me," I replied flatly. "We need to talk." There was a pregnant pause before the gate swung open with a metallic groan. I could practically hear the sneer in her tone as she responded. Well, to what do I owe this pleasure?" Gripping the envelope tightly, I steeled myself and strode up the long, winding driveway towards the looming house. Candace was already waiting in the doorway, arms crossed and chin raised in a silent challenge as I approached. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here, Raina," she said coldly as I mounted the front steps. "After that despicable stunt you pulled with Marcus last week?" Can it, Candace? I cut her off, taking a small vindictive pleasure in her look of shock. We both know why I'm really here. Her icy glare narrowed suspiciously. And what's that supposed to mean? Wordlessly, I thrust the overstuffed envelope into her hands, my jaw clenched tightly. See for yourself. Keeping one wary eye trained on me, Candace flipped open the envelope and began rifling through the stack of documents and photos inside. I watched in tense silence as her perfectly arched eyebrows slowly knit together, lips pursing tighter and tighter with each damning page. What is this? She finally hissed, whipping her venomous glare back up to me. Some pathetic attempt at blackmail? I shook my head, feeling a grim smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Not blackmail, Candace. The truth. Her eyes widened fractionally as she seemed to realize the full implications of what she was looking at. I could see the panic starting to set in as the evidence mounted, a clear, undeniable pattern of unhinged behavior, obsessive jealousy, and severe mental issues. You deranged little bitch, she spat, cheeks flushing crimson with rage as she hurled the papers at my feet. You think this proves anything? Marcus would never believe your insane lies. Oh, I don't think he'll need much convincing once he sees all this, I countered coolly, gesturing to the scattered documents. Not after the little message you sent Caleb a few weeks ago. Her face drained of color at my pointed reference to the night she'd shattered my son's bedroom window. For a brief moment, she seemed to teeter on the edge of losing her carefully constructed composure entirely. But just as quickly, her mask of indignant fury slammed back into place. You have no proof, she snarled, taking a menacing step towards me. This is all just sad, pathetic conjecture on your part. A desperate ploy for attention, as always. I held my ground, locking eyes with her as I delivered my parting words with cold finality. That's what you think, Candace. But pretty soon, Marcus is going to see the truth. He's going to see what a deranged, twisted shell of a human being he married. I paused, letting the weight of my promise sink in. And when he does, your precious life of wealth and privilege is going to come crumbling down around you. Her face contorted in a mask of pure unrestrained hatred. You'll regret this, Raina, she seethed through gritted teeth. You have no idea what you've just unleashed. Turning on my heel, I left her seething on the doorstep and headed back towards my car, each step lighter than the last. I knew there would be hell to pay for my actions in the coming days, but I didn't care. The wheels were finally in motion. Candace's downfall was inevitable, and nothing would stop me from watching her world burn.